We're live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's Committee of the Whole meeting. My name is Tim McGonigal. I'm the chair of the Committee of the Whole, and I welcome you to today's proceedings. First of all, I'd like to recognize that we are on the unceded territories of the Quechan, Malahat, Subaset, Halalt, Penelakut, Snaminis, Layaxan, Pakwichan, Dididot, and Pachidot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. Welcome, Alternate Director Manhouse. Also, it's a celebratory day today, National Iced Tea Day. Also, Mechanics Day, so celebrate accordingly. With that, Ms. Boyd.
Mr. Chair, point of information, are you talking about iced tea the wrapper or iced tea the drink?
Actually, the drink, I believe,
Oh,
sir.
okay.
Ms. Boyd, if you'll get me back on track.
Thank you, Chair. May I please have an approval of the agenda?
Moved, seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you. We have the Committee of the Whole minutes of April 24th, 2024, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of April 24th, 2024 be adopted.
Mr. Martman, everything is good in those minutes? No, you have a point.
I know we worked long and hard, but the minutes state that we finished at 12:54 a.m. I suspect that might be in error.
So noted. That would be PM. Correct. Anything further? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Also acknowledge that online we have Director Wilson and Toporowski joining us virtually. Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. There is no business arising from the minutes. We have the public input period. The public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on agenda items before the committee considers the item. The public input period procedure policy allows for an allotment of 15 minutes where the speaker is welcome to comment on any items on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that are or have been subject to a public hearing. The speaker should comment in a polite, calm, and courteous manner using respectful language, civility, and decorum. We did receive yesterday a letter regarding to be read out loud for public input period of R4 from Ms. S. Astleford.
So prior to that, is there anyone in the audience who would like to provide us with public input today? You could just state your name. I believe we know you, but we'll state it for recording purposes.
Mr. Chair, I'm Cliff Evans, Director of the Shawnigan Basin Society. I'd like to thank the board for funding the Shawnigan Basin Society on a 3-year contract, and at least that will give us a few funds to carry on some of the very necessary work that we do in the Shawnigan watershed. Mr. Chair, I see in the analysis that the CVRD states that we have not requisitioned the 488 funds for 5 years. That the funds were used extensively by our previous director, and we had a lot of professional work done and scientific studies on the watershed. These are scientific papers, and the maps were professional maps made up, which we used for the charrette when it came. We were the first people to speak at the charrette for Shawnigan Lake, and they were amazed at the maps that the Shawnigan Basin Society had produced. In fact, they asked for copies, and a lot of the charrette was designed around our maps. Mr. Chair, function 488 was a local function. So our director had a 1 in 9 chance of getting anything pushed through that she wanted to. once we go to a regional funding, then our director only has a 1 in 16 chance of getting something through. Mr. Chair, I would like to see function 488 shelved until, at least until we have an election and see if the next director will use this tool. This is a very important tool for watching specific things in the Shawnigan Basin Society. You know, when you're cleaning up your place, you throw things out that you figure you'll never use again. And probably 2 days later, you say, my God, why did I throw that away? I need it. I think we should give another director a chance to see if they want to use this funding and get some of the professional work done. We had 3 doctors working for us, we had a couple of helicopters working for us, and all sorts of professionals. We have managed to fund this for 5 years, but it's a lot of work, and I'm getting tired. Please just shelve function 488 for now. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Anyone further from the public for some input? Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Aisquail Siemna Siea to those online and those following this recording afterwards that aren't here in person. It's a privilege to share 2 recommendations and a concern with you this morning. So my name is Kim Bernard, and I'm representing myself as a 31-year resident of the Shawnigan Basin watershed. I recently had the privilege of touring the watershed just to the south of us. So Exhibit A here is a glowing map of a rewilded watershed. The Capital Regional District saw decades ago that this important work needed to be done. And in fact, it was, I would offer it as a representation of what happens when regional government takes over the entire management completely. In fact, there's no habitation, no recreation, no deforestation allowed, and they are actively acquiring even more lands to shore up the resiliency of this into 7 generations from now. So I was inspired to see it's as pristine as any land could ever be in our modern times, and to see that water sparkling was an inspiration. And for me, what 488 represents is a journey of learning over the pandemic. I read this book. So the book I'm holding up now for the recording is called Saving Water, Stewardship of the Shawnigan Community Watershed, Adapting to Change in the Critical Decade of 2020 to 2030. And this is actually the 2nd edition. So it references in this 2019 edition, the defunding situation is an epilogue at the back. So if I have an opportunity in the public input, I will actually share that, because I'm not sure that everyone has access to this information. And this is all of the studies that Mr. Evans alluded to, but it's in layman's terms. So this is available to residents in the watershed to understand the issues that we're facing and to understand what we individually can do and what we collectively can do. And it absolutely outlines a plan for collaboration with local government. It is so, so important to have the champions in this room and online to be able to facilitate conversations with the province and other big picture policies that need to happen so that we can safeguard these incredible resources. We're all mindful of what's going on right now in Calgary when infrastructure, it's so fragile. It would take just a moderate shake to throw us all in the same boat as what's happening in Calgary right now. And so I would plead with you with my concern. When I read the report, the staff report to committee, I saw that when Function 488 in Bylaw 3737 was first enacted, it says it's to assist the SBS with costs associated with watershed management and public safety issues. So that's under number 2, service being established. And I really feel that, if anything, those have been exacerbated over the years. We have unregulated recreation and and growth, and we need to be able to manage that. And finally, the concern that I have, if there's time, I beg indulgence on this, is that if we have a top-heavy administrative function, such as the regional one that is proposed here that would take the place of this, then it doesn't allow for the individual watersheds to represent themselves, even if staffing or other issues may make the gears turn a lot less slowly at that higher administrative level. And so I think 488 and others like it will help watershed groups such as SBS do the work that they have stepped up to do as citizen scientists and community volunteers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You did go a little bit over, but seeing how there was no line up to speak, I was a little bit lenient. Some say I'm a nice guy, some don't. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We received correspondence yesterday and was requested to read it out loud prior to voting on R4. And this is from Shirley Asselford of taxpayers of Area B and C. In my opinion, the directives served by these two bylaws are not adequately covered by the DWWMP. One, their stated purposes are not included in the entirety. Two, the funding models are area-specific where DWWMP is regional. Bylaws 3138 and 3737 are effective tools available to CVRD directors for specific needs. The fact that these bylaws have not been utilized by the current directors does not make them redundant. Previous knowledge holders put these two bylaws in place because they are recognized for the need for specific area taxation. They are doing no harm by existing and should remain. I am unaware of any benefit that would result from repealing the bylaws in question. Having these two bylaws available as tools for the directly affected areas ensures our ability to move forward with the area-exclusive funding to augment the DWWMP. Thus, no debate for issues about one area getting more funding than others under a regional fund. It does no harm to keep the bylaws, and it allows for hopefulness that Shawnigan could fund Shawnigan-specific issues with drinking water and recreational water quality needs, and South Cowichan has a mechanism to move forward and work together on water issues specific to each area. Should a future Area B director choose to proceed with the level of water and sediment monitoring appropriate for the lake that has a contaminated soil pit buried above it, is surrounded by forestry lands, and is under tremendous development pressure, bylaw 3737 provides a method to do so. A Shawnigan-specific Eurasian milfoil eradication management project could also be funded under 3737. The added expense to taxpayers to repeal them properly is not only unnecessary, but also unprecedented. Having the reinstated when their value is recognized will be virtually impossible given the current economic environment. The specific funding functions under... Sorry. The specific funding functions are an valuable tool for direct actions by community. Please reject the staff recommendation to repeal these two bylaws. Thank you for consideration. And just to note that we don't normally read out public input, but this was a personal request, or a direct request, and I'd like to pass it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Mr.
Boyd,
Chair.
and welcome back. Yes, Director
If I may,
Stone.
just on that, I don't think that's appropriate. If we open that door for people to be able to request that they write in letters and speak them in public input, you're opening a door and it's a slippery slope. So I'd prefer in future if we adhere to our policies. At any time, of course, the board can make a motion to waive the policy, but I think if we set the standard that someone can make a personal request and essentially void our policy, I don't think that's good practice. It might open the door to getting flooded with emails that are said, we want this read in a public meeting. Thank you.
Appreciate the point. Thank you very much. Anything further? Ms. Boyd, please.
Moving to delegations, we have Reed Bailey, Land Use Planner, Land Use and Geospatial Unit Land Use Planning for Agricultural. He is on by WebEx.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Going to share my screen here. I have a PowerPoint presentation to show you today. Just maybe let me know if you can see that.
Good on
Yes.
our end.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. First off, I'll be sure to have some iced tea after this. Thanks for that note. I like iced tea. And yeah, I'm here to present on BC land use planning for agriculture. So my presentation should be about 15 minutes. And I'll also recognize too that our regional agrologist for Mid-Island, BJ Mills, is also on the call as well. So first off, yeah, I'm going to quickly go over why agriculture is important in the province, talk about 6 big pressures on BC's farmland, some tools in the toolbox for local governments regarding land use planning for agriculture, some key messages, some key actions, then we can wrap it up with some discussion and questions. So first off, why should the province and local governments even support the ag sector? Well, it is a significant contributor to the province's economy, and the sector is growing. Income from farms increased from just over $4 billion in 2020 to $4.37 billion in 2021. And it's often surprising when you compare it to other sectors. The oil and gas sector, for instance, in 2020 was lower than the agricultural sector at $4.02 billion. Employment figures tell a similar story about the importance of agriculture to the economy. Agriculture really does support BC businesses and family businesses and BC jobs. In 2022, there was 31,000 people employed in primary agriculture in BC, and compare that versus 17,000 for forestry and logging, which has traditionally been viewed as the backbone of our province's economy. And this kind of goes without saying, but food security, it's just getting more important than ever. The UN reports that the global food crisis is only getting worse due to things like the ongoing global conflicts and climate change. And really, we should be doing everything in our power to produce as much food as we can. So turning our minds now to some of the pressures on the farmland, it should come as no surprise that arable land in our province is very limited and under a great deal of pressure. Specifically, 6 of these pressures are the limited arable land itself, cost of ALR land, urbanization, housing, demographics, and a lack of industrial land. And I'll quickly talk about each of these in turn. It is really interesting too. These pressures are really nothing new. Almost all these pressures have existed in some form or another for the past 50 years, which is precisely why approximately 50 years ago the Agricultural Land Commission and the ALR were created. The main difference, however, now is that many of these pressures are simply much more severe than they were back in the 70s. So the first one, here's a map of BC, and the green there indicating our agricultural land. You likely know the ALR is a mix of agricultural capability, so different soils in different regions that can grow different crops. There's this interesting stat out there. You might have heard that 5% of BC's land base is in the ALR. While that is technically true, it's actually very misleading. For starters, 7% of the ALR, so 7% of the 5%, is not available for farming. And what that means is if you have, let's say, a block of 100 parcels in the ALR, within that block you're going to have roads, bodies of water, rivers, lakes, perhaps some federal lands, so lands that are not able to be farmed yet are still captured in the ALR. And a bigger concern is 5%. Of the 5%, 54% is Crown land. And if you think of Crown land, there's so many competing uses on Crown land: mining, First Nations, forestry, recreation, all sorts of things. Buying Crown land as fee simple in order to start a farm these days is virtually impossible. So some serious challenges here. And there is recognizing there's some non-ALR farmland as well, but it does not have the same protections as land in the ALR. So it's much more challenging to farm outside of the ALR than it is within. Turning over to the next pressure is the cost of agricultural land, which unfortunately just continues to rise. The average cultivated farmland in BC increased by 8% in 2022. This was preceded by an 18% increase in 2021. BC land values are the highest in Canada. To give you an idea, the South Coast is $139,000 per acre, which is by far and away the highest cost of farmland in our country. To compare that with Ontario, they range from $4,000 per acre to a high of $28,000 only. And you're probably wondering where the island fits in. Well, it's pretty expensive on the island too. It's about $63,000 per acre, so quite pricey as well. And really, what we're seeing is that an increased demand and limited supply are contributing to these higher values. Farmland near urban areas, in particular, is seeing a huge competition for things like small hobby farms, people wanting to live a rural residential lifestyle, and investment opportunities from investors. The third pressure there is urbanization. As most people are likely aware, BC is a great place to live. That's probably why you live here. While the exorbitant cost of living is driving some people to move elsewhere in Canada, on the whole, our population is growing and showing no signs of slowing down. Related to urbanization too is more people means more infrastructure. You're likely aware of that. This puts a big strain on local government purse strings. And 3 areas of significant high growth are the Lower Mainland, the Okanagan, and southern Vancouver Island. And this in and of itself, this isn't a problem, but from a farming perspective, this is a huge problem because this is also where 80% of BC's total farm receipts or income are generated. So here's a map here. You can see you guys are captured in the yellow. So those 7 yellow regional districts account for 80% of our total farm gate receipts and have 77% of our population. So a lot of people packed into a smallish area where the bulk of the farming in our province is occurring. So this is indeed a problem. Related to urbanization is housing demands. I mean, I'm stating the obvious here. As everyone knows, BC has high prices for housing that just keep going higher, and this is both to purchase a home and for rentals. BC, not surprisingly, it's the most unaffordable province for housing. This explains a recent kind of trend that's emerged of BC British Columbians moving over to Alberta. So we're seeing this out-migration for the first time in our province. Usually Albertans tend to move to BC, not the case anymore. And it's worth noting too, this isn't just a Lower Mainland problem anymore. For years and years, prices in the Lower Mainland were blowing up, but the rest of the province stayed fairly level. Not anymore. About 5 or 10 years ago, everywhere else started to rise too, and really seeing this ripple effect of people moving out of Vancouver into secondary cities like Victoria, Nanaimo, Kelowna, and then people from those cities moving into tertiary markets like Cowichan Valley Regional District. And really, because of this, more people are looking at the ALR to solve the housing crisis. And I'm here to tell you that we shouldn't actually do that. The first thing to note is it's called the Agricultural Land Reserve, and put it another way, it's land that is reserved for agriculture. Land that might not be suitable for agricultural production today, tomorrow, or in 10 years, one day might be. With changes in technology and the economy and climate change, just because there's a vacant ALR property today does not mean that it won't be a productive farm tomorrow. And something to always keep in mind as well is that the ALR is really not the solution to BC's housing crisis, nor is the ALR the solution to local government planning on housing. I'm absolutely not trying to criticize local governments here, far from it. What I'm simply trying to say is that it's simply too easy and tempting for people to look at unused ALR land and say, hey, there it is. There's the solution to our housing crisis. If only we could develop that property. That's really not the mindset that we need to have. I think as a province and a country, we still have not adopted the build up instead of out mantra. And it's certainly worth noting, too, that more people living in the ALR just equals more headaches for everyone, particularly for farmers. More people living in ALR results in increased traffic and people driving farther distances. It also involves people unfamiliar with farming are the first ones to complain. We saw this during COVID, where a lot of people moved out of urban areas into rural areas, and these people are often unfamiliar with farming, and the first ones to pick up the phone and complain when a farmer fires up his tractor in the morning.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
Mr. Bailey, I'm
Sure.
looking for an extension on your time. Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Stone. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Sorry for the interruption, but it gave you a chance to have a chug of your water.
Yes, thank you. I needed that. Yes, as I mentioned kind of earlier, more people living in the ALR in rural areas too does put a lot more strain on infrastructure. Many rural areas simply are not equipped to handle large populations or big population increases. Related to that too, I'll keep this slide short, but yeah, depressingly, the average age of a farmer in Canada just keeps rising and increasing. BC has the oldest farmers in the country at age 57.8 on average. This is not unique to Canada. This is a trend in most, if not all, Western countries. Depressingly, fewer young people are getting into farming. We're seeing it's decreasing every year. This is a huge problem There's tons of reasons for this, the primary being a lack of affordable farmland, but also a lot of young people are not interested in farming. It's a very tough job. It's a lifestyle choice. It can be very, very demanding, and a lot of people like myself just choose to sit behind a computer and do this job instead. It's worth noting too that BC does have the highest proportion of female farmers in Canada. I think that's kind of an interesting stat. The sixth and final pressure here is the lack of industrial land. There is a critical shortage of industrial land in Metro Vancouver and in a lot of places in our province, and it's resulted in some extraordinary prices. It's now up to $7.1 million per acre in Metro Vancouver. That is staggering. And as you can imagine, people are starting to look at the ALR to expand their industrial activities. And, redeveloping industrial land, not surprisingly, it's incredibly profitable for developers, and it generates tons of new taxes for local governments. So there is a lot of benefit here, but, my message is we shouldn't be creeping onto the ALR. It is worth noting too that industrial lands offer really good employment opportunities. There's lots of very good jobs in industrial in the industrial field. So yeah, quickly, I'm going to kind of zip over this. You have the slide. You might PowerPoint. You can look over this in more detail after this. But really, here's how local governments can help agriculture in BC. So here's a couple tools. Through the Local Government Act, you can consider supporting agriculture with developing an agricultural advisory committee or creating an agricultural area plan, having more favorable tax and water rates, things like this. The ministry has also published what we call our minister's bylaw standards. So these are standards that we encourage local governments to adopt when they're reviewing their zoning bylaws regarding agriculture. These include everything from setback distances to size and siting for residential uses. It's also important to note that, farming businesses, following farm practices are protected by the Farm Practice Protection Act. Local government nuisance and animal control bylaws do not apply in the ALR if a farmer is following these practices. So that's always something worth noting. We do have our agricultural land use inventories. So this is where our GIS team goes out and surveys all agricultural land within a regional district, compiles a report, sends it to a local government. We encourage local governments to utilize this data when undertaking reports and plans. Regarding the ALC Act, it's just important in your plans and OCPs and whatnot to recognize that the ALR is a provincial zone where agriculture is priority use. And it's really important to adopt the ALR regulation rules into local government bylaws as well. There's many uses that local governments cannot prohibit but can regulate within their zoning bylaws. And lastly, the ALC has a whole series of really informative and useful policies and bulletins, so I encourage you to stay up to date on these. They have about 20 of them. It's a good way they do a good job of just explaining the regulation in layman's terms. So a couple more slides and then I'm done here. Just a few key messages. So first, the competing demand for limited agricultural land is growing. Everyone wants to work, live, and play in BC's very limited valley bottoms. The challenges for farmers are increasing. Price of land, encroachment of residential and industrial uses. This is leading to more challenges for farmers, like complaints and from urbanites and what have you. Ensuring greater food security requires having an available land base to support the agriculture sector. If you don't have the land, you can't have farms, and converting farmland to hard surfaces is often impossible to reconvert back. And protecting this really important provincial asset, requires a provincial and a local government effort. We're kind of all in this together. We sometimes hear that farmland, let's just let the ALC protect that and do that. But there is a local government role to play here as well. Local government elected officials do make a difference to support farmland, farmers, and the BC's ag sector. So last slide to take us home here, some key actions. So really, help BC farmers succeed by reducing some of the burdens within your control. I just outlined a few on a couple slides ago. Creating a good example is creating stronger buffers between farmland and other uses. Good fences really do make good neighbors. Coordinating your local government neighbors to enact bylaws impacting agriculture that are consistent, fair, and easy to understand. If you have consistent bylaws between you and your neighboring regional districts and municipalities, it's much easier for farmers to understand the bylaws, makes it less confusing, and really recognize that non-farm uses are having a cumulative effect on the ALR and having a big impact on the agricultural land base. So that's it for me. There's my contact information and BJ's as well. Happy to field any questions if there are any.
I'm sure there will be. As we get the screen coming down, I'd just like to make a comment on your mention of Crown Land, the ALR within Crown Land. I think an additional pressure is the regulations brought down recently on looking at Crown Land for housing options for those municipalities who are not meeting their attainable housing assessment. So there's another pressure on land within Crown Lands that resides under ALR. I'll start with a question on the classes of ALR lands. Could you just let me know how many classes of ALR land there are?
Yeah, so it goes on a system from 1 to 7. 7 would be basically unavailable for farming. That would be, the side of a mountain, if you will. Whereas class 1 would be what we call prime agricultural land. It's an interesting distinction too. It doesn't necessarily mean class 1 is better than 2 or 3. It just means class 1 is more suited to grow a wider variety of crops. To elaborate on this a tiny bit, it's really interesting that the vast majority of the Okanagan's soils used to grow for orchards and vineyards are actually class 4 and 5. So people think, 4 and 5, that's no good. But no, those soils are perfectly suited for tree fruits and for vines. So that's kind of how it works.
Thank you very much for that. I do have a few questions, one from Director Wilson online and then Director Douglas. I'll look around. Is there any further? Put Manhas, Stone, Morrison, Markman. Oh my goodness.
I'm a popular guy.
Seagal. Is it Seagal or Seagal? Seagal, sorry. Anyone else? Okay, we'll start with that. You've got a few questions there, Mr. Bailey. First of all, I just want to ask Director Martman, do you fit within the demographic of the median age for farmers?
That would be privileged information at this point.
Thank you, and I'll go to Director Wilson for his question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay? WebEx
Yep.
is working. Brilliant. Reid, thank you very much for that. The presentation has brought forward actually a lot of the concerns that I and others in my area have highlighted in the past. One of the phrases you used, which really is a major point, is reducing the burdens on our farmers. That one in particular does hit home with me. If I go to leaving out the economic factor, which is obviously of concern, let me concentrate on the food security aspect here, which to me is just as important. Now, without the farmers, this is what you've pointed out, without the farmers, we do not have any security. Having said that, without the water, we will not have any we will not have any food anyway, even if we got the farmers. So at the moment, there is a subject coming up in the CVRD of drinking water and watershed protection in progress. And farmers have brought forward to me their concerns on this. And if you bear with me, I just want to read you an email which points out this particular aspect and ask for your comments, please. It says, I'm just wanting to send some information through about this water sustainability plan taking place. This is a serious matter. The plan has power to alter and remove water licenses from generational farms. BC is not issuing any new water licenses in the Coxsackie watershed, so how can new farms start farming without water rights? I'll miss a lot of this stuff, how large-scale irrigation ponds cost an exorbitant amount of money. So basically, how can we, and this is a different department to yours as far as I can make out, the people who issue the water licenses are actually now in perhaps not granting more, but then we have a crisis of water. How are we going to reconcile everything that's going on here with water and keeping our farmers? Is that a bit overcomplicated?
Well, I mean, it's complicated, but it's also very simple. Like you said, you need water to farm. Is BJ, are you on the call still? He's dealing with a lot of the water-related stuff, and I was hoping he could speak to this if he's still here. He was here. No, he had to go. Okay. He's gone. Yeah, I mean, again, there is a different ministry that issues the water licenses, and I am not integrated into that. I realize the issues with the Coquihalla watershed. I've been well apprised with those, and I mean, unfortunately, I don't really have an answer here. BC's facing water shortages all over the province, and it's an ongoing issue. And I know the ministry that deals with that is at least trying to do a better job of disseminating information than they did last year. So that's a step in the right direction. But I think it's a challenge that's only going to continue. Sorry, I know that's not a really good answer, but.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Reid.
Thank you very much. Moving to Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, a couple questions. One, I think, was already partially covered. Just with regard to the soil classifications, when many of us have to review ALR exclusion applications or non-farm use applications, there almost seems to be this argument that if it's not Class 1 or Class 2 soil, that it's somehow not suitable for agriculture and therefore is appropriate for either removal or for other uses. And wondering if Mr. Bailey could elaborate on that a bit more. And the other question is with regards to gatherings for an event. My understanding is under the current regulations, one is allowed up to 10 of these events per year as a non-farm use. Our Economic Development Committee at our municipality just recently received a presentation from a local farmer who had highlighted this as an issue, especially for younger farmers trying to generate an additional source of income. A lot of them do want more of these special events, but I certainly appreciate the challenge there that if every ALR property has more than 10 special events a year, it's really going to undermine the intent of having the agricultural land reserve. So again, wondering, Mr. Bailey, if you could comment on that as well.
Yeah, so the first one, I mean, everyone seems to, when they submit an ALR application, likes to think that their land can't produce agricultural products, and they use that excuse typically of bad land. That argument often doesn't hold water. Again, Class 4 land can be phenomenal land for growing a variety of items. And just because, you can't grow every single crop in the world on Class 4 doesn't mean it's useless at all. So, really encourage you to look at that and think like they're, Class 1 to 5 typically are very good for growing a wide variety of crops. And it's also important to note too that there's also non-soil based agriculture too, right? That's becoming more important these days, greenhouses, vertical farms, these types of things. So there are indoor forms of agriculture. The second one's really interesting, the gathering for an event. I mean, that was put into the ALR regulation to acknowledge exactly what you said. Farmers were, we realized that they needed, different forms of income stream beyond just their farming activity. So that's why we allowed things like gathering for an event. But you basically, you nailed it yourself. Like, if you allow more than 10 events a year, let's say, let's go to 20 or 25, what then becomes is you basically just have an event center in the ALR. And when more time and effort continues to be devoted into, your events, then that's usually taking away from the farming activity. And we've seen this before for things like agritourism, when the agritourism activity or the gathering for an event just becomes so large that the farming activity is often forgot and kind of left in the dust. And that's certainly not what we want to see. So we figured 10 is a reasonable number, and if people do want more, they can always apply to the ALC for more. They might not get approved, but they could apply.
Thank you very much. Director Manhouse next, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bailey, for your presentation. You had mentioned that 54% of the ALR is Crown land of the 5%. Has there been any push from your organization, your ministry, to approach the federal government and to release those Crown lands into the ALR for the province of BC? And also understand there's pressures also as there's some of these lands are used for negotiations for treaty settlements. So has there been any push from your ministry to go to the federal government to get these into the ALR permanently and not for treaty settlements or anything else?
Yeah, so just to clarify, the federal government's not involved at all. That's Crown land owned by the province, not the federal government. And of that 54% of the Crown land, that's already in the ALR. But again, the issue is there's all these competing issues, competing interests of forestry, mining, logging, so on and so forth. And believe me, we would love more Crown ALR to become fee simple for farmers to access. We would love more ALR Crown land to be available for more ranchers. we are absolutely pushing for this, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news. The Ministry of Agriculture is a bit of a minnow in the great big, amorphous provincial government, and we often get overrun by some of these bigger ministries. And unfortunately, again, that's kind of why no more Crown land will probably ever be doled out as fee simple. It's just a bit of a depressing fact.
Thank you. I'll add Director Nicholson to my list, but next is Director Stone.
Just two questions. One following on that. Couldn't there a tenure system be established like is with other Crown lands around forestry for agricultural use? I would think that might be an interim compromise. That wasn't my question. It just came up thinking of Director Manhast's comment.
I should clarify, there are Crown land range tenures. I don't think there's too many on the island. They're more popular for large cattle ranching operations, typically in the Caribou and in the Peace River area. So those tenures do exist, but there's no such tenure for leasing for a vegetable farm or something like that. All the tenures have to do with grazing.
Okay. So the question I had though was, I thank you for the presentation. It's good. It's informative, and I think it aligns with what we hear and see more broadly. But the tools are within the ministry. Like, why doesn't the province legislate the framework that they want to see for ALR lands, and so be it, right? Like, the provincial government's putting continued pressures on local governments in all sorts of different ways. It doesn't seem like they're hesitant to legislate and dictate what they feel local government should be doing with any sort of land, including their own or private lands for that matter. Why wouldn't the provincial government just legislate what the Ministry of Agriculture sees as the highest and best use for agricultural lands and protect them in that manner rather than having to try to influence local governments? I think we've got all kinds of other agricultural conversations on our agenda today. I think Cowichan Valley, among others on the island and across the province, are worried about food security and would like to see more productive use of farmlands. So we're on the team. So this could be one area the province could actually legislate without feeling like they're coming down heavy-handed on local governments and help us all help each other, right? So why doesn't the province just legislate the kind of framework they want to see for agricultural land?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I feel like your initial comment there was perhaps talking about the government's overstep on the housing stuff, but anyhow, that's another issue. Yeah, you know what? It's really interesting, and so how much do I say here without getting in trouble? I guess, what the land use planning team, what we would like to see for the ALR and for agriculture often differs from what the greater ministry actually wants to see. And again, there's a lot of people who think ALR land should be being used for non-agricultural purposes. And, if I had my wish list, the ALR use regulation would look a lot different than what it would now. What you could be able to do and what you should be able to do would look a lot different. But unfortunately, our little land use planning team often gets overridden and trumped by other aspects of our ministry or other ministries for that matter. So what we would like to see doesn't exactly mesh with sometimes what the province wants to see, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I would concur that sometimes that's how we feel too.
And that was a very good political answer, Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, thank you.
Director Morrison, I don't think he's in trouble now. No. Director Morrison?
Thank you, Chair. And something that Reid said that I'm going to repeat is what can I ask without getting into further trouble? So first I wanted a clarification. Does access to water, is that one of the components of what is describing arable land? That's my first question.
No, actually, it's not. It's merely done on soil capability, so the soil itself. So to get a little bit more into the 7 classes of soil capability, it dives into subcomponents. So what you'll often see is, let's say there's a piece of land that's class 5, but one of the limitations on that land will be aridity. So if water is available for that piece of land, it could then perhaps augment it to a class 3 or a class 2. So it is kind of taken into account in that regard. We call it improved rating and an unimproved rating. So it's somewhat factored in.
Thank you for that. My second question, and you kind of alluded to it, but you didn't go too deep, is, I've been around a little bit longer, and there's always been this desire to ensure that what started out as a farm continues to be and will always be a farm. And there's this push towards non-farm uses on farms, and I kind of cringe when I see these come in. I understand farmers are looking for other means of income, but I'd like to see more of a push to have to support the farmer to farm, as opposed to support the farmer to do other activities. And yet I think there's absolutely places for farm stay accommodation, farm labor accommodation, even maybe some short-term rental accommodation. Those make sense and don't use a lot of the land base. So your thoughts on supports to help farmers farm as opposed to supports to help farmers do non-farm activities on the land?
Yeah, good question. I can tell you one thing we're looking at. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there's the farm tax classification system, and it's woefully out of date. So the long and the short of it is, if you earn a certain amount of income from your farm, you then are into a different tax bracket, and you get a big tax advantage, which is wonderful, right? It's an incentive to farm. It hasn't been updated since the Stone Age, and it needs to be revamped, and we're actually looking at doing that right now, and we're looking at possibly making some dramatic changes to that in the whole goal of getting more farmland farmed by making it more incentivizing farming. So we're exploring that. I actually have a whole day meeting on that next week with about 20 other people from different ministries. So it's something we're very aware of and tackling. And just on your question about the Airbnb thing, I don't know how you're coming at that, but just for clarification, I mean, you can have ALR properties are through the ALC Act can have a secondary residence up to 954 square feet, and that can be used for Airbnb rental. Again, something to supplement farming income. So that is available.
Thank you. Moving on, Director Martman, please.
Thank you. Interesting comments and questions. I guess, very high level, why now? So why are you presenting to regional districts, or are we the only one?
No, good question. This call went out to all regional districts and municipalities in the entire province. And about 35, I think, have responded. So this is my 5th one that I've done, and I have a few more. I'm doing Comox Valley RD next week. This was actually meant to be closer to the municipal election, which is 2 years ago now, to kind of indoctrinate, new councils into the importance of agriculture. So we're a little bit behind. We got a little bit delayed, but that was the goal. But we're also just trying to spread, our messages as loud and wide as possible, whether that's to councils or to planners or to really anyone that has a stake in the agricultural gain. But the idea of targeting councils was, your decision makers, you do have an influence on the land. So let's hit them with some interesting stats and facts.
Thanks, and Chair. I have a couple questions. That's okay.
Sure.
So I think the first question I have is really around affordability for farmers to buy. I see it as a huge barrier.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm looking at your picture that you put up there on housing demand. It shows that very large, almost estate-like house and a swimming pool and the whole use. And I'm wondering about why the ministry doesn't just say, and this is sort of like Director Stone was saying, set some rules around, if you're buying farmland, you have to farm it. So that's a question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely preaching to the choir. This is where we have a disconnect between our land use planning team and the rest of the ministry. We've been talking about that for a decade. That's something we've explored. We've wanted to implement, and maybe not requiring farming, or maybe having more of a disincentive to not farm, something on that end. And even on the housing topic, like we put in this maximum house size of 500 square meters, 5,500 square feet. That's massive. That's huge. It's likely way too big. But we unfortunately there's a small contingent of people out there that are very vocal and often get their voice heard, and that's why that 500 square meters wasn't dropped to 400, which is what we had initially recommended. But let's leave it at that.
Thanks. And one more question, and this one actually comes out of the recent decision at the federal level around capital gains tax. Are you familiar with it, going from 50% to 66%?
Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah, and this is, from my perspective, part of the succession planning of farmers, trying to move from, one generation to the next generation, or just trying to, figure out how they're going to manage their retirement. And I'm just wondering, does the ministry look at this or have any tools or consider putting tools in place that would promote the succession planning aspect of farming?
Yeah, great question. A startling stat: 9 out of 10 BC farms don't have a succession plan. A big problem. We are very aware of that. We have hosted a whole variety of succession planning workshops over the last decade or so. They kind of got sidetracked with COVID, and we're hoping to get those back up. But we do have a lot of programs. We have an agribusiness program and a couple others that are really designed for succession planning. There's tons of resources available online. This is something we're very aware of, and we're trying to, again, encourage farmers to adopt a succession plan, because too often a succession plan can simply be, for instance, wanting to subdivide and sell off a big piece of your property and then use that as your retirement income. So I'm very aware of the problem, and have a variety of solutions to kind of tackle that.
Thank you for that. Moving to Director Segal.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Later in our agenda, we'll be talking about agricultural planning and having a discussion about increasing capacity within our organization. And so I noticed in your presentation that Agricultural Advisory Commission is recommended, but we'll also be talking about the potential of an agriculture coordinator position. And I know that the Kootenay Boundary Regional District has gone a different route with farm advisors. I'm interested in this, just the advisory commission and the coordinator, of course, come with a price tag. We'll be looking at service enhancement. What Kootenay Boundary has done with these farm advisors is funded through the Columbia Basin Trust. So I'm just wondering, if our end goal is to connect with farmers and support them as a regional district, what is the best way to go?
I think that's, it's kind of hard to say a best way to go. It's usually a combination of a variety of things. I think the fact that you're trying to identify and hire a staff specifically dedicated to that is wonderful. Too often there is a big disconnect between councils and staff and the actual farmers in the field. So I think a coordinator position could do wonders to kind of mend that or create that bridge. And I mean, that's a fantastic way to connect with your agriculture community. And an agricultural advisory committee, agriculture area plan is really good. I know, I can't remember if CRD has one, but a variety of municipalities do have them. And it's a really great way to kind of focus on exactly the goals that your municipality or your regional district wants to achieve, and putting in kind of tangible steps and more towards actually achieving that. District of Metchosin just completed one. It's fantastic. They've outlined these 6 priority areas and target dates and actions and whatnot. So that's kind of really honing in how they want to enhance agriculture in their area.
Follow up, are you good? It's interesting you mentioned the Columbia Basin Trust, which is a well-funded trust, as opposed to
Yes.
the Island Economic Coastal Trust, which is insufficiently funded in my opinion. So I'll go to Director Nicholson.
Thanks for your presentation, Rita. It was really good. I'm wondering about food security. That's a really hot topic now, and I'm wondering how we're doing on the island. Do you have any statistics on that?
Yeah, not good at all. Really bad, actually. I don't have the exact stat, but it's something to the effect of when the ALR was created 50 years ago, it was approximately 60% or so of our food on Vancouver Island was produced here. And I think now we're down to about 4%. So it's bad. Again, there's a whole host of issues for this. An interesting one too is exports. This whole idea of like we're exporting so much of our blueberries and cherries and other crops overseas, and that's often a huge income generator for farmers, right? So it keeps farmers afloat, but it's doing absolutely nothing for food security. So that's a bit of a delicate balancing act we're trying to weigh. But yeah, very complicated topic. And then you can then even get into like, growing non-food crops, right? Which there's lots that we grow, but they also have utility. So yeah, I could probably talk for a day about this one, but I'll maybe stop there.
Follow up?
Yes, so does the ministry have a target for like the island on food security?
Good question. Not that I'm aware of. I don't. We have a different branch that's dedicated to that. Grow, feed, and buy BC. But I don't think we have a specific target that we're trying to achieve. Not a bad idea, though.
Thank you for that. Director Ishdash.
Thank you, Chair. The question I had was fortunately asked by Director Douglas, so thanks for the presentation, Reid. I'll just echo what Director Douglas said was regards to definitely in North Cowichan, we're seeing a lot of farmers and especially our efforts to bring about groups like the young agrarians and young families moving here because we are seeing the aging demographic, but time and time again, they are 100% committed to farming, but need that economic diversity. As you said, when you mentioned $63,000 an acre, I imagine that number is probably even higher when you look at the Cowichan Valley in specific. And we are seeing a lot of farms becoming estate properties rather than farm. So I do think that's something, if I guess maybe the municipality needs to write letters of support on those. If there is the avenue, they can get an exemption for more events. That might be something we need to do. And just hearing from our presentation from the Young Farm family last week at our economic development meeting. So, but I'm mostly just popping on here quick, Chair, was just to follow up to Director Martman's comment. As a small business owner, I've been mindful knowing that in succession planning with my business and as equals applies to farmers is that $1.25 million is 100% tax-free exempt through succession planning. So capital gains exemption is there to support people that are looking at succession or moving on their properties and farms. And more so the new capital gains tax is about targeting more like large investment flipping and business flipping where it's targeting only 40,000 people in Canada.
So looking around for any more first-time speakers before I go to Director Stone again. Director Stone, please.
It was just a point of information because it was tweaked by the funding position available from the Columbia Basin Trust. So unfortunately, Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast is the least funded in terms of those kinds of resources. Northern Development Initiative Trust has almost $200 million available to fund projects like that in the north. Columbia Basin Trust, I think, is dispersing $90 million a year just in investment revenue. But here on the coast, as we know, the Island Coastal Economic Trust receives a trickle compared to the other regions around the province. So unfortunately, we don't have access to the kind of funding opportunities the other regions of the province do to hire agricultural coordinators or those kinds of staff. We have to put that burden directly on our taxpayers if we'd like to do that. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think I set you up on that one, didn't I? Okay, Director Douglas again.
Yeah, just quickly, one last question. Mr. Bailey, I understand the Cowichan region is one of the only regions without an agricultural land use inventory. I wonder if you could speak to how we might prioritize that.
Yeah, great question. A couple of years ago, our ministry really recognized finally the value of these agricultural land use inventories, and a lot of money has been pumped into the program, which is fantastic. They have way more staff than they previously did, and they have an ambitious goal to to start surveying, well, the whole province for one, and doing it, doing follow-up surveys every 5 to 6 years. And Vancouver Island specifically, I think Cowichan Valley is targeted for within, I think it's a couple years out, but there is an acknowledgement that Vancouver Island hasn't been done lately, and it needs to be done. Our ALUI team's going out to the field just next week, actually. But for CBRD, it's, I think 2026 is what I'm hearing. I don't want to quote me, but that's kind of the rumor.
Thank you. I see no further hands, so I want to thank you for your presentation and all the directors for those very pointed and good questions.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely. My pleasure.
So
Okay.
looking at the time, we've been here an hour. Are we ready for a 10-minute break, considering some of the items coming forward? So we'll be back here at 10:40, please. Welcome back, directors, staff. We are live again. So if we could continue on with our agenda, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. There's no correspondence or information. We move to 8 reports. R1, report from the General Manager, Land Use Services Department regarding Regional Planning Service.
Director Stone, before we start?
No, that's once we get rolling.
Okay, Ms. Cheryl?
Get on the list, Mr. Chair.
You are first on the list, and Director Douglas is second.
Good morning.
Are you ready?
I am, Mr. Chair.
So are we. Here we go.
Thank you. So the report before you presents options for consideration in relation to regional planning and a regional growth strategy. Follows strategic plan direction, items 2.1 and 2.2, which include recommit to Cowichan 2050, hold a board workshop in 23 to better understand regional growth strategies, and then consider what policy to include in an update to the strategic plan by Q2 2024, which is now. And 2.2, explore options for reestablishment of a regional planning function. So you recall that correspondence was sent out to municipalities in 2023. A number of responses were received, which pointed to determining the feasibility of a regional planning service and initiating a regional growth strategy. So a workshop was held on November 29th, 2023 on the topic of regional growth strategies with staff from the province of BC and Comox Valley Regional District, in addition to an elected official from the Comox Valley Regional District to talk about their experience with RGS. Subsequent to that, the province approached the CBRD and offered funding in the amount of $250,000, a fairly strings attached grant to initiate a regional growth strategy. So staff are before you today to present a recommendation that that happen, and that happen under the umbrella of a regional planning service. by first conducting a feasibility study to determine the purpose, scope, funding, delivery, and governance of that service. Inviting First Nations chiefs and councils to participate in the topic of regional planning and growth management, recognizing the board's commitment to DRIPA and UNDRIP, that communications prepare a news release to acknowledge the receipt of the provincial funding, and that the strategic plan be updated, both items 2.1 and 2.2 to reflect that the CVRD will work with municipalities and First Nations towards the development of a regional growth strategy, and secondly, undertake a regional planning service feasibility study. So there is a alternative recommendation, or I should say, an option in the report. The second option in the report is to forego the initial work on a feasibility study for a regional planning service, and proceed with developing an RFP for an RGS through a consultant, and that staff would bring that back to the board for consideration in Q3. And then the other items listed are fairly consistent with option one. And I should say that that option doesn't preclude the opportunity to also work on establishing a regional planning service if the board wishes to do that. It is just an option that would possibly get you to a regional growth strategy more quickly than the first option, which is a slightly longer route and perhaps a little bit more methodical. I think lastly, I need to make a couple of comments just in terms of why you may want to consider a regional planning service instead of just a regional growth strategy, or not doing any of it at all. We do have a number of regional plans and activities and initiatives that have happened in the absence of a regional planning service. And by developing such a service, it would provide a home for these actions. And I think about things like a regional housing needs assessment or reports, affordable housing, climate adaptation, agriculture planning. These are all things that sort of, involve multiple divisions and departments and organizations, and planners are well equipped to do that kind of work. And so that is my pitch for regional planning, to provide an umbrella for those types of activities. And just to be clear, as I noted in the report, an RGS doesn't require a service to be established. It can be established outside of or initiated outside of a service, but there should be some form of, in the absence of a service, there should be some sort of partnering agreement between the CVRD and the municipalities to ensure equity in the allocation of funding and resources to support the work. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm sure there are some questions.
I have an inkling there may be a couple. I'm going to look around. I have Director Stone and Douglas first. Anyone else while I'm Director Acton, and online Director Wilson. Director Stone, please.
Thank you. So I think, to put it simply, I think we're committed, our community in terms of our council is committed to going through an RGS process and recognizing that as part of that, it should hopefully strengthen the local area plans, the modernized OCP and harmonized OCP of the electoral areas and those of the recently adopted municipal OCPs as well. I do have concerns, and I know that from our discussion is maybe not quite represented fully in the letter that was received from our municipality, but I know that we're not sold on a regional planning function, and there's a number of reasons for that. But a big part of it does have to do with things like housing and the speed which we need to move, and how regional planning service combined with an RGS may either facilitate or impede rapid progress on some of the initiatives that we have outlined throughout our community OCPs. So there's just questions there, and I worry that the establishment of a regional planning function might slow other important initiatives down for the electoral areas and the municipalities. I recognize that we're all working really hard. We have a number of special meetings municipally just to get the small scale multi-unit housing zoning in place for our municipality. But I think that as the year moves forward, some capacity hopefully will be freed up within the municipalities to be able to sort of zero in on some of our housing challenges and other challenges in implementing our fairly freshly minted OCPs in our communities. And I want the local regional areas and their directors to be able to have confidence that there's enough capacity, resources, and focus on the modernized OCP work so that it can get done. And this isn't a criticism. I know that it's a tough, a much tougher process, I think, for 9 electoral areas. But the speed or lack of speed with which the OCP process has unfolded over the last number of years and the years ahead just leads me to have some reservations about a regional planning service that would live within the regional district and how that may impact the speed with which municipalities are able to implement important land use decisions when those opportunities or decisions or applications come forward. But on the issue of the RGS, if the intention is to strengthen and provide that umbrella over our OCP work that's either happened in the municipalities or underway in the regional district, I'm fully supportive of that, and strengthening those local area plans and making sure that we commit to all the things we're hearing, protecting the farmland and the rural areas, recognizing the municipalities are willing to accept and have kind of codified in our OCPs, accept that growth within the containment boundaries that we've all set. I know North Cowichan seems to be pretty strongly supporting their regional growth boundaries as a council in totality, not maybe in majority, if not totality. Mr. Manhas, see you over there. So yeah, I think there's a combination here of the two. I would say if the board decides to look at the feasibility of a regional planning function, I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. I just don't want to spend too much of the limited resources, both in terms of human capital within our municipalities and the regional district, our planning teams, even with consultants. It does take time for our staff to give input and participate in those things, while also that work of the feasibility may delay the RGS even further. But I'm willing to entertain, the feasibility. I'm just think there's going to need to be more engagement with the municipalities. I can read the town of Lake Cowichan's perspective here before we get the idea that that's, even if feasible, it may not be desirable for the region to have a regional planning function. But I'm very supportive of the RGS under that condition that it's meant to strengthen the OCPs that we're doing either in the electoral areas or that are already done in the municipalities. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I have Director Douglas next, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I agree with all the comments from Director Stone. I would view the regional growth strategy as a way to strengthen our OCPs and the municipalities and the electoral areas, and a great way to bring us together and to work together in terms of long-term planning. The province has created this regional growth strategy as a tool for local governments to work together and to have that eye towards long-term planning, not the 3 or 5 year cycle, but with a 20-year or beyond planning time frame. And I know it's been discussed around this table many times before, but if you look at the high growth regions of the province, Southern Vancouver Island, Lower Mainland, including the Fraser Valley or the Okanagan, we do stand out as the one regional district without a regional growth strategy. And there's probably certain cases where we want to be the anomaly, we want to be different than the rest, but I would argue this isn't a case where we want to be different than our peers. And not having that regional growth strategy over the last 20, 30 years has created many challenges across the region. If you look at our growth centers, I mean, we haven't achieved those high levels of density that planners have recommended according to the SMART growth principles for many years. We've also created, with our settlement patterns, we've undermined our efforts to expand public transit is just one example. So our BC Transit representative was here recently, and I had a chance to talk to him about why we've been unsuccessful year after year in getting that expansion and provincial funding to expand our public transit system. And what he indicated to me was part of that is the way we've approached our settlement patterns across the CVRD. We are quite spread out, and we can't go back in time and change that, but going forward, we can take more of that regional approach, work together to achieve the settlement patterns that are going to support greater use of public transit, where I think we use about probably 1% of residents across the region now actually rely on public transit as their main source of transportation. We've also heard around this table many of the pressures around facing our watersheds. And, as has been pointed out before, watersheds don't recognize those jurisdictional boundaries of municipalities or regional districts, and I think speak to the need for us to work together in terms of our land use planning. One of the points you've made in previous meetings, Director McGonigal, is that with the regional growth strategy, this doesn't have to be a state-of-the-art document that starts everything from scratch. It can be a document that really stitches together our existing official community plans, and as Director Stone noted, could really strengthen them. We could take that as an initial step, leave it at that, or if we want to expand on that, perhaps more of a biodiversity lens or focused on watershed, we could do that, or we could just leave it as that kind of bare bones document that, again, stitches together our official community plans and provides that basis for our regional district and our municipalities to work together. And I think that has been a problem over the years. There isn't that level of cooperation and coordination. And I'm not here to criticize the regional district. I know my municipality and North Cowichan could have done a lot more in that regard over the years. And my hope is that with the regional growth strategy, it's again going to provide that structure to bring us together and to work together on these big land use planning decisions. The other point Director Stone mentioned is with the OCP work underway right now. I know many of the electoral area directors, you're keen to update your zoning bylaws, local area plans as well. And I certainly don't want the regional growth strategy to pull you away from that work. My hope is that with this provincial funding that we receive, we've got $250,000 from Ministry of Municipal Affairs specifically for the regional growth strategy. We have funding we've set aside from the Growing Communities Fund as well. My hope is that we could use that funding to bring in a outside consultant, as is noted as in option 2, to undertake this work. And that's really the approach we took at North Cowichan recently with our official community plan. We brought in Modus, a well-known planning consulting firm. Over a 3-year period, they helped rewrite our official community plan from scratch. I think we spent about $250,000. We had extensive public engagement. Over 1,000 of our local residents actively participated in that process. And I would hope that if we can bring in like a high caliber planning consultant, someone like Modus, that they could really carry the burden and do the heavy lifting in terms of developing that regional growth strategy. If there is a need for more staff oversight, I mean, I think with $500,000 we can go a long way towards this, and maybe there's an opportunity to bring in a planner on contract over, say, 2 years to provide that oversight if there is worry about pulling staff away from the other work on the OCP and the zoning update. In terms of the recommendation before us and the two options, my concern with the first option is it does make the regional planning function front and center and sort of takes a slower approach with regards to the regional growth strategy. As was noted in Ms. Gurja's presentation, the second option leaves out that regional planning function and would have us issue the RFP likely this fall for hiring a consultant. As Director Stone noted, there may be a way to combine the two. And so what I would suggest to the board is we may want to initiate the regional growth strategy now with the provide direction to staff to come back with the RFP or a report on issuing an RFP within the third quarter, as is recommended in option 2. But then also at the same time direct staff to undertake this feasibility study on the regional planning function. And I think we would have more time to consider that, because as is noted in the report, we can have an agreement between the municipalities and the regional district with regards to the funding of the regional growth strategy, and then to consider whether or how we want to set up this regional planning function, perhaps as a next stage after that. But I think we would have a bit more time to do so, and I'll wait till everyone else has had a chance to offer their perspectives. But if there is interest in that third option, I do have some wording here that I prepared and gone over with our CAO.
Thank you for that. I have Director Acton, Wilson, Manhas, Morrison, Segal, and I will add Director Stone at the bottom again, and Director Markman before Director Stone. So let's go to Director Acton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just, everything has been said, it feels like, so I'll just say that I agree with the previous speakers. And, but as an electoral area director, yes, of course, our biggest concern is what we have underway right now. In an ideal world, I would love for that to have been done, and then we would be reassured that no work will be, no time will be taken away from that. So I guess I'm just going to sit back, but that is, of course, the greatest concern here, and I do look forward to all that regional growth strategy has to promise, and yeah, I think we can only do better, so thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson, please, online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Crikey. That was an awful lot to digest there from, I'll try and be brief. Director Stone has brought up the speed factor, and we already have, I think, delays as far as the regional district planning is concerned. If we bring in a regional planning, I agree with him, there could be more delays here. So that is a big factor that I have here, and something which I think has to be addressed. The other one, of course, that Monsieur Rolfe brought up was who pays. And this is where it comes into the cost sharing. I'd like to see a lot more on that one, because this has to be something which I don't know how you would do it. Is it allocated by the number of ones which have to go to a regional, or is it allocated by the size of it, or whatever? It's a big thing. So I will leave, those are my two concerns, the cost sharing and the speed at which things might be done.
Thank you. Moving to Director Manhas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I concur with everything Director Stone had mentioned. Regional planning, what impact would this have on each jurisdiction's autonomy? You know, we tried amalgamation with the City of Duncan a number of times, and the City of Duncan, actually, the North Cowichan, as a bigger jurisdiction, voted overwhelmingly for amalgamation, but City of Duncan did not. And main factor was that they would lose their identity, they would lose their autonomy for their citizens. I know when we were going through our OCP, our mayor mentioned, or Director Douglas mentioned our OCP process, and many of our properties, we had applications in stream for development, and when the OCP was finalized, over 300 properties were down zoned. That's our properties owners losing value of their properties. And some of the applications were in stream. They had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on their developments, potential developments, and because they were downzoned, because they're changing the urban containment boundary, we had to they had to come back rezoning and all that, and unfortunately some got through and some, and others didn't. And I said, we got pending applications in stream with CVRD here. Mainly, I'm looking at the Poly development. I know there's another one development coming up. What will that do to those developments? So I have serious concerns about regional growth and regional planning.
Thank you for that. Director Morrison, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. the more we discuss this, the less convinced I am. And I'm really trying to keep open-minded, and I'm asking some really basic questions, and I will actually ask Ms. Charolf a question. But the two things that I'm having a challenge with is I still don't know what problem an RGS is going to fix. That very basic question of what is it trying to fix? And I don't know whether it's a question of political ideology or whether there's a profound way of doing business under an RGS that is somehow going to help us zone land appropriately, get development to fix the housing crisis. I haven't heard how this is going to get us there. So we had the RGS workshop, and I'm sad to say that I'm less convinced after it than I was going in, and I don't know that the province did a very good job in presenting the merits and the benefits of that program, and admitted that it needed to be updated. So it brings me to a recent meeting where Ms. Charolf was standing right there and explained the timelines and the exercises that her staff will be engaged in on the modernized OCP, the local area plans, and the comprehensive zoning bylaw. And to me, it looks like they're fully committed and pressing the fastest timeframes that they can. So we have our staff working full out to meet those goals of what we already have in place. And I'm kind of saddened because of all the work that was done on Cowichan 2050, which I think is a document that's still relevant to this organization. So my question would be, and I know it's still, we've got a running total going on our existing harmonized, modernized OCP and zoning, but do we have a sense of the cost of the Cowichan 2050 project, and if there's anything significant that would come from that would contribute to the process that's being proposed in either option 1 or option 2?
Through you, Chair, to Director Morrison and the other directors. So there are a few things there. I can't speak to the costs related to the development of Cowichan 2050, but I can say that was a marvelous process that brought multiple parties together and created a wonderful document that is actually the foundation for not only electoral areas official community plan, but the board's strategic plan. So that work has carried forward despite perhaps an awareness of the fact that that's happened. So it was a wonderful process, and many of the statements within that report are still valid today. I would say that since I have the microphone, there are some shortcomings in that, and it was never, I don't think, the intent of Cowichan 2050 to be a regional growth strategy, and it certainly doesn't contain elements of or that a regional growth strategy would contain. And one of the key missing pieces for the regional district is a lack of a comprehensive servicing strategy for this region. There is no long-range servicing plan for water or sewer. There is a liquid waste management plan for the south end that is about 25 years old. We need to be looking comprehensively at servicing for the region to identify where growth should go based on where servicing is possible, available, where we have the water, et cetera. And so I think that is one of the key pieces of that an RGS process could work on. The other key piece would be looking at development in relation to the aspirations of our local First Nations communities, who we know have significant desires and aspirations for future development, and a process that is going to look at how we align with our local First Nations and their development interests would be extremely fruitful. One of the significant things that local governments can do for local First Nations is to enter into servicing agreements. So that, again, related to servicing is something that I think the RGS could offer. I hope I've answered the question.
Follow up, Director Morrison, or that concludes?
Yes, please. And further to what's been brought up by my alternate director opposite, is there a manner by which, electoral areas can have the confidence that their development pattern, local area plan, intention to settle areas or expand areas can be that exist today, and I'm going to say it, it's Poldy, can be enshrined, baked into this process going forward? Because, I think a lot of what we are talking about here is a bit of a leap of faith, and I have concerns because I've heard at this table talk of what was shared of down zoning and the likes, not in regards to a specific area, but if there's identified areas, call them local area plans, or areas that of potential growth where services are either available or being made available, can those be enshrined in either the local planning service or regional growth strategy so that they're not lost through the process?
Through you, Chair. The answer is yes, absolutely. We have a fairly significant planning process obviously underway at the current time to complete the official community plan, the modernized official community plan, and 9 or 10 or possibly 11 local area plans, which include the Poldy area. And in my expectation that won't change. And certainly there's an opportunity for a regional growth strategy to enshrine that. The regional growth strategy can be very firm, but it can also provide a certain amount of flexibility, and it really comes down to the board's level of comfort with the rigidity of the document. And I could send out examples. I probably should have attached them to my report of RGS documents, which are very high level and very visionary and really don't commit the member municipalities to anything. And then there are others that are very, very strict and strong and really force you to stick to the growth boundaries, et cetera. So it really comes down to how that document is developed.
Thank you for that. I have a growing list of first-time speakers, Director Stone, so I'll apologize in advance. I have Director Segal, Martman, Deck, Nicholson, and then back to you.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. Just an understanding of what it means to create the service. Does that mean referendum? And for the option 2, how is it paid for? Is that an agreement that will be defined? Or is there an existing function we all contribute to that it would come from?
Through Chair, through you to Director Segal. So service could be established through, typically would be established, sometimes they don't require an establishment bylaw, but the recommendation is that a service would be done by an establishment bylaw, and that would be done through elector assent, either through referendum or an alternative approval process. Did I get that correct? Yes, thank you. So that's the process. And so I'm sorry, the second part of the question.
Yeah, just this option 2, which is just without a regional planning service, just looking for some clarification on then, so how would it get funded?
So through you, Chair, there is some funding that has been earmarked, obviously, to initiate work through the electoral areas. So the electoral areas are essentially, I would say, funded. It's seeking compensation from the municipalities and if it's a matter of contracting with a consultant to undertake an RGS. It's sort of the overhead or project management expenses because it does require staff time to do that work. So there would be some expense related to that. I would not expect it to be astronomical, and staff would report back with, you know, a projection or estimate.
Certainly.
And there isn't a function that exists that draws from the munis and EAs?
So the CBRD does have a number of regional services. We do not have a regional planning service. So if it was the board's intent to develop an RGS through one of the other regional services, that it would certainly be an option. It's not recommended because we don't have planners within other regional services that I'm aware of.
Thank you for that. Director Martman, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure which side I land on with all the speakers prior. The concern I have is not as immediate as today in trying to get everything managed, but it's about 20 years from now or 50 years from now, I'm looking back and saying, did we make the right decision? And I'm not convinced I know what is the right decision. And that's why I see feasibility study and following sort of our direction and our strategic plan to move through this, maybe in a more drawn out process, but I think at the same time, recognizing that once you enter an RGS, there's no exit plan for that. That's it. You're committing to that. So I guess that's where I'm trying to really understand the 50-year view ahead. The other piece, and I think this is around the autonomy, and I think it questions around electoral area autonomy and trying to understand the impact of an RGS on that autonomy. It's important to my community. I know that I sit here as a director of the CBRD, but at the same time, I listen to municipal mayors talking about how it's important to their community, and I think I have to express that autonomy is very important to my community. I also want to sort of put out the myth of growth containment boundaries. The idea that you can hold growth within an area is nice to say, but believe me, we see it in electoral areas. I see it in my area. Where do those people go when they want to recreate on the weekend or go ride their bicycles or, you know, enjoy the other areas? Well, they're going to be looking at electoral areas. That's where they like to go. They like to go to our beaches. They like to go to our parks. And so growth in contained is one thing, but it impacts my area or our electoral areas as well. And there's a cost to that. And does the regional growth strategy provide a way to help that? I know in Director Acton's areas, you've got the Kinsale Trestle, for example, and the impact of that on parking and all those kind of things. So those are electoral area concerns that I bring to the table. And so I guess I see option one as being the way that it will allow me time to comprehend, understand, and move forward with the decision that I can look back in 50 years, well, maybe not in 50 years, 20 years from now, I can look back and say, yeah, we started the right thing. Thank you.
Given that you fit in that demographic, which was mentioned in the agriculture thing, I think 20 is appropriate. Thank you. Director Deck, please.
Thank you, Chair. Director Douglas brought up some points that have been concerning me for a long time, and it's the big regional problems like transportation and watersheds and biodiversity that need big regional solutions because they're regional problems. So I'm certainly for regional planning and a regional service for all the reasons that Mr. Douglas and yourself, Ms. Chirov, brought up in terms of servicing and agreements with neighboring First Nations. So yes, I'm for the growth, the regional planning service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Nicholson, next, please.
Thank you. I had my first Advisory Planning Commission meeting last night, the first one since the term began. And what was interesting was the comments about the people who advise me and the other directors on land use stuff, commented on how fast this region is growing all of a sudden and the changes that they're seeing and their concern. And I really believe that we need to be really proactive and get moving on a regional growth strategy. For many of the reasons that Ms. Cheryl mentioned, First Nations is number one. There's going to be big change in the next 20 years, I think, and we need to start planning for that. And servicing, whether it's water, sewer, or transportation, really important issues. I would say that to Director Morrison's question about what it can provide to us, I think it's the one tool that we haven't used that actually could strengthen our OCPs and prevent what I'm seeing right now is this incremental development creep. So I think it's extraordinarily important to get on with it. I would be in favor of option 2 with a perhaps looking at the feasibility of a service function as a secondary priority at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. No further first-time speakers. You got bumped again. By Director McClinton. Shall the chair be challenged? Thank you. We'll chat later outside. Director McClinton, please.
Gross, thank you. First, some questions and then some comments. With the regional growth strategy, I just want to confirm, is that still, in order to be enacted, need unanimous support from the board, or is there some other mechanism that moves forward?
Through the chair, I believe that the province could mandate it. Certainly, yeah, it would be I believe it's 2/3 majority of the board or unanimous consent of the board.
It's 2/3.
It's not unanimous.
Maybe.
We would seek unanimous support.
Chair from it.
It's not required.
I think from our strategic planning session that maybe there's some miscommunication there. I heard something incorrectly, but I would appreciate getting an answer on that. This feels to me like a bit of a Trojan horse. I think there's some directors that have spoke pretty loudly about this. I'm going to sort of come at it from my area, then look more broadly. I think a situation like regional recreation is a perfect example about how some electoral areas feel their autonomy being taken away from, where a significant portion of the tax increase in my area specifically, well over 90%, the last 2 years has been regional based. And I think in some of those smaller electoral areas, the folks are saying we want less of people from other areas speaking to what we do in our area. I think it is also not wise to be taking funding to set up a service like this. And I'll give a perfect example in my area. There was some grant funding for the slope stability. We had some work done. It was not nearly enough work, or not nearly enough money to get all the work done, and now we're left with a half-baked policy that's not a bylaw, that is being implemented when people go to do any development work on their property. So I know they're very different things, but fully funding this and having a plan moving forward, I think, is important. So seeing this $250,000 and some deadline around that, that's a dangled carrot. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket for what we spend regionally when you consider the municipalities and the CVRD. And
it feels to me that when we say we have problems around growth and development, those aren't problems for some other directors. Those are lost opportunities. And again, I think each area, electoral area is really, really concerned about their autonomy. And I don't think that has been addressed in any meaningful way whatsoever. And it feels like this train got put on the tracks and it's moving forward no matter, what the comments are. So, thank you.
Thank you. Director Stone.
Thanks. I just want to take a step back from the focus that we seem to be getting around the table and remember that regional governance is supposed to be regional. Shouldn't be this autonomy discussion. And I appreciate Director Manhas, but a regional growth strategy is supposed to strengthen the diversity and different perspectives of all of the different communities from a regional perspective. So it's not about autonomy, but it's about strengthening the land use decisions that manage important environmental and economic considerations throughout the region. And I said at my opening, strengthening the local area plans of those areas. And that in some ways may reinforce autonomy, but no individual director or area should be making unilateral decisions without context and without being challenged by their fellow electoral area directors, who should be working as a council of 9, if you will, on land use decisions, bringing all their different perspectives, but recognizing that the OCPs and the zoning and land use plans, local area plans for each area should be strengthened. And that's what an RGS should do, at least from my perspective. Some of the narratives around recreation on a parks per 13 square kilometers that is Ladysmith's municipal boundaries. We have an inordinately high amount of park areas, and I would challenge that many of the electoral areas may not experience in all the totality of their parks the kind of numbers that we accommodate within our solely funded and managed municipal parks, whether it be Transfer Beach, the expansions that we have in the further waterfront area plan, or things like Holland Creek. But I've never put that on the table because this isn't a competition. We're all supposed to be working together regionally, and our community's been happy to support those park uses to be shared with our regional neighbors. The things like First Nation servicing agreements, Ladysmith, we've done this 12 years ago now with Staminas, and it's such an important part and mutually beneficial to both the nation and the town. When you look at what Oyster Bay offers our community, just in the hotel itself, it's been a boon to both Staminas and the town of Ladysmith. And we should look to expand things like that, understanding that everybody pays a fair share, whether it's a nation or a local community or a regional district area. We can all work together to make sure that both our economic and environmental needs are met. I look at Couch in 2050 not as a regional growth strategy, but as definitely a foundational document that would serve really well to be incorporated into a regional growth strategy, because what our OCPs don't do in the same kind of depth is contemplate things like watershed thinking, like watersheds span electoral areas and municipalities. And sometimes in our own OCPs, we do some work there, but we pull from Couch in 2050 and the work of the Environmental Services Division and the Land Use Services Division at the CVRD to help inform our decisions around sea level rise and watershed management and even food security. Like in Ladysmith, we don't have a lot of ALR, or agricultural land, unlike North Cowichan, but we need to consider those things that are even outside our boundaries when we develop our own OCPs, because the lack of agricultural land in Ladysmith needs to come from somewhere. And it's my hope that whether it's Saltaire or Area H or wherever it is throughout the region, that regional growth strategy would protect and secure those areas in the image of the communities, right? In the way that each individual area sees the value it can add through a regional lens to what we're all trying to achieve. So I don't get this different perspectives should absolutely be represented in RGS. And that's why I keep coming back to when the local area plans are done and the director's happy to bring them forward and they're committed to by the electoral area directors and the board, those should be codified and protected by the regional growth strategy, right? So where's the cart and where's the horse in all of this, right? Maybe it means that our next step to provide focus to the local area planning process for the electoral areas should be get the modernized OCP and the local area plans completed and codified, and right away move to implementing an RGS that brings all of those pieces together. Because this isn't me trying to steal development from North Cowichan, or it's to hopefully when Ben comes forward, Director Martman comes forward and says, listen, these are really important factors to us, that we provide those and protect those within an RGS that provides that extra layer of protection. And yes, if we want to go outside our urban containment boundaries, that might mean it's more challenging. But that also means that the provisions we say around parkland and stuff, that if we develop to X, we have to do Y in terms of park acquisition, means that our municipality is then also committed to those pieces through the RGS lens. We have food security, watershed management, private forest land, managed forest land challenges, water availability challenges. We can help each other with those things. You know, I know full well because of our agreement with Staminas and Staminas' work out in the aquifer that the areas in Area H that need access to more water, hopefully for farming, not for development, if codified in an RGS, should be available, right? And that those municipalities or First Nations in that area can hopefully help with making those needs, not dreams, but needs a reality. The mitigation adaptation to climate change is big. Food security, I already said. And it's about a partnership, and it should be a partnership. It shouldn't be about loss of autonomy. It should be all of us coming together to say, we've taken the individual lenses that we have, looked at our areas, come together as a region and strengthened a land use plan, an overall growth strategy that says, yes, there'll be development in this area. Yes, these important farmable lands will be protected. And yes, these important parks, whether the municipal, regional, or electoral area community parks, will be protected. And that we're all doing our part to serve the needs of the region over the next 20, 50 years, right? So I can't ascribe to this dialogue. I'm a person who came to this table and was like, don't mess with my muni, right? And over time, I've come to advocate for an RGS, and that's not to take over Saltaire or North Oyster Diamond, because they'd never let it happen. But it's to say, maybe there is a bit of a district municipality type lens we can do here and recognize that an RGS will provide that diversity of our area, focus development where it needs to be, protect the important lands, both biodiversity and agriculture where they need to be, and we can have a strong vision for the future of Cowichan that works for everyone and each person, you know what I mean? Like, not just for the individual area, but also when we balance it out for the entire region. Thanks, sorry for the rant.
I feel way better after that. I have some second-time speakers. Will you indulge me to go before the second-time speakers? As chair, I should be down on the bottom, but I'm going to insert myself as a first-time speaker. First of all, I think it's imperative that input from First Nations within our region are considered within a regional growth strategy. Otherwise, it is not a regional growth strategy. Looking at these First Nations as an economic driver within their own communities is also imperative. I have some concerns on a planning function, as do other directors around this room, considering that an RGS can be as simple as a high-level document, and it will be a living document, no different than an OCP, which is updated every 5 years, etc. Harmonized OCPs that are implemented within the RGS will give the autonomy to those areas that have that incorporated. My concern is that if we fail to implement our own, that the province will come down with a mandated RGS that probably none of us will like. Another form of downloading that we've seen far too many times. So I think it's imperative that we get on the same page and bring our differences to the discussion and how we want to move forward. In a perfect world, if the harmonized OCP had been implemented, some of these discussions would not have occurred. So thank you, and I'll move to Director Douglas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll be brief. Appreciate Director Stone's point with regards to the regional thinking. I think we all sometimes have this tendency to focus on our own areas, and I know I've been guilty of as well, viewing everything through the lens of North Cowichan, when our job at this table really is to look at the broader region. And I think when you look at the challenges facing the Cowichan Valley Regional District now and over the next 10, 20 years, we're really going to need that regional approach, whether it's addressing the housing supply challenges or the health of our watersheds, or again, getting back to creating that more efficient transportation system, which isn't just about public transit, it's addressing the congestion that we're going to get through the Trans-Canada Highway with population growth, or finding ways to encourage more active transportation. We just adopted a active transportation plan at North Cowichan, a master transportation plan, and my hope would be that through an overarching document like an RGS, we could find a way to coordinate that with a lot of the great work that's being done here at the CVRD. Mr. Chair, you mentioned First Nations, and despite the focus with DRIPA and our focus on reconciliation, it does feel like First Nations are often forgotten in a lot of these discussions. I know in my comments I focus on cooperation between the regional district and the municipalities, but with First Nations communities in the broader region, they're growing fast. They have a much younger demographic than the rest of the non-Indigenous population, and they are facing serious housing supply challenges themselves. So it's imperative that we find ways to work together, and this RGS certainly could be a great way of doing that. We have two options before us. I know I suggested we may want to consider a third option that combines them, and I think Director Nicholson described that well, as make the RGS kind of front and center and then have the feasibility study attached to it kind of as more of a secondary item. I wonder though, Mr. Chair, and I know you and others have expressed some hesitancy around the Regional Planning Service, if we might want to vote on them separately. So perhaps vote on the regional growth strategy as the first step, recognizing that it's not going to happen tomorrow. We're asking staff to come back with a report probably in September about the RFP. So likely this project wouldn't actually start until early 2025. And then as a second motion, we can decide if we actually want to pursue the feasibility study for the Regional Planning Service. But just to separate the two, recognizing there's some hesitancy around that additional item.
Good point. Thank you very much, and we'll take that into consideration when the time comes. I do have Director Morrison next.
Thank you, Chair. The report that was presented, and I think it was meeting that we had with the province and colleagues from up island, had given a timeline and history of the RGS efforts at Cowichan Valley. And I'm pretty sure it was 3 decades, might be even longer. And it was really quite a tale. And I bring it up because I'm feeling much along the lines of what Director McClinton said, as this it's on the tracks and it's starting to hurtle down the tracks to a destination. And I know that, you know, I want to judge what we do on the basis of actions, not the words of everybody around the table. And I'm actually quite convinced, and thank Director Stone for his, would you call it a rant event? Because I can see that we need to conduct the exercise. We need to move down the track. But I'm really uncomfortable with the idea that we're going to we might be considering the RGS as the foundation and the other stuff, and I know it's not stuff, as secondary. I think full exploration of this entire process is important. So I would entertain support for option 1 if we're doing what it feels like, a rush to judgment, a rush to get RGS front and center. I'm just not there, and I think there's others around the table. So if we're going to think regionally, are we going to force this through with 2/3 or majority or whatever it is when some of us around the table just aren't with the program? We're not on the train. So I would support option one and doing the exploration, explore the regional function with a view to RGS. But I just am not comfortable with the notion that we declare today that we're RGS focused and the other stuff is superfluous to the exercise. I think if we're going to do this, we should do it carefully, methodically, and try to do it as much together as we can. And putting RGS front and center just is a bridge too far. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. I'd much rather us be the conductors on that track than senior levels of government is my only point. Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on that, Director Morrison's concerns. We have done a lot of work. We have got Cowichan 2050, and a regional growth strategy would not happen overnight. And in fact, with the real need to bring First Nations into this process, it's not going to happen very quickly, I don't imagine. But I think we do need to get going on it, and we have a lot of good stuff to build on. So I definitely think this is something we should get started with, and certainly we should explore a function, but I don't think that should be the priority. I think it's most important to start this process happening because change is going on, and we really need to have some framework around that. I think some understanding of where our big risks are out in the region as far as growth goes. We have a lot to lose.
Thank you. Have we exhausted this discussion? Director Martman, apparently we have not. Sir.
I do understand the need for a regional perspective with a lot of the issues, but I do have a question for staff. If we move forward, and I have the feeling that the idea of we're moving into a regional growth strategy, at what point, is this the point that an area would have to choose to opt out? Or is that would come at a later date? Because that's really the only option at this point that I would have to consider if I am opposed to going forward with a regional growth strategy without having a full understanding of the feasibility and so where in the process does the opt-out occur?
Chair?
Good luck, Ms. Cheryl.
Yeah, that's a difficult, opt-out isn't necessarily an option. I mean, it'll be a board vote to proceed or not. There is an opportunity for the provincial government to consider whether or not a regional growth strategy should only apply to a portion of a regional district, not the entire regional district. And that would be a decision with the minister.
So the area director does not, I guess when I read the document about regional growth strategies, it said there is a provision, as you mentioned, for an electoral area to opt out for a couple of different reasons they gave as examples. It was unclear about how you initiate that, and I would not, and I just wanted assurances that if the vote is to move forward with the regional growth strategy today, that I fully understand that. Do I have to make that motion now, or is this at what point to exercise that provision within the regional growth strategy? I just don't understand for sure, because if it comes out 6 months from now or a year from now, that, you should have done this at the original meeting, Director Martman, then I would feel uninformed. Thank you.
Chair?
They get difficulter and difficulter.
It's okay. I welcome the difficult questions, and it's good to ask difficult questions, right? I think that it's a question that could take away and come back and provide more clarity on in the next report that comes back in Q3, if that's the direction. But, you know, my understanding is that if an electoral area doesn't want to be included, that you can discuss that here as a body, but it's a board's decision as to whether or not that electoral area would be included, not an individual electoral area director. There's no individual electoral area veto or decision to not be included. It's a decision of the board as to the membership in the strategy. But I will add that the process of developing, it's a process, right? Developing a regional growth strategy would be a process. And through the process, the applicability of the regional growth strategy can be explored. And through the process, it might be determined that there are parts of the region that perhaps it doesn't make sense to apply an RGS to those areas. I don't know. I mean, that's certainly, like, that's not a question that we can answer today. And the RGS, if it is, you know, something that the board chooses to pursue, it doesn't come into effect until bylaw is adopted, right? And that's at the end of a lengthy process. As noted, the funding that's been provided by the provinces for a 3-year period, right? So it's anticipated that a regional growth strategy can't be developed overnight, that there's going to be a fairly extensive process involved to develop a document.
Follow up, Director Marmon?
Sorry, Chair, if you're, with your indulgence.
No, that's fine. Perfect.
In electoral area H, we live on the edge of the regional district of Nanaimo, as most people know. And so we have a bit of an advantage in that we get to connect with the electoral area directors next to us. And when you talk about, you know, I ask about regional growth strategies, and the one thing that's really clear is the municipality's strength within the regional district of Nanaimo. And, you know, and I just feel so good at this table because the electoral area and municipalities are balanced. That's not a balance that occurs up in the regional district of Nanaimo. The municipalities are hugely populated and representative, and that goes to my mention of 20 years from now, because this, what we experience today is very, for me, very powerful from electoral area experience. And 20 years from now, we know where the growth will happen. We know the representation of municipalities will increase. And so I think we're at a from my perspective, we're at this point where electoral areas, if they're going to influence anything, now is the time that we will influence something. And so that's why I'm cautious about going forward. I think it may be the greatest thing to do, but I'm not convinced it's the greatest thing to do at this point until I sort of go through the process. So that's where I'm standing. I'm sort of be so, I don't know if it's stuck or just inability to sort of see the picture that other directors are sharing. Thank you.
Not a concern. We all need to be comfortable in the decision we make, for sure. And I have a growing list again. Director Wilson, McClinton, and Acton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Director Markman does bring up some very good points here. One of the things that I think Mr. Elf did partially answer this, some of the comments I've been hearing here are, well, you know, if we don't approve something like this, then it's going to be downloaded onto us from the province. That is almost like being held to ransom. However, having said that, I think Mr. Elf did say that we have a 3-year period in order to get this done. Is that correct, Mr. Elf? We have 3 years?
Chair, through you, the funding that's been provided has an expiration of 3 years, so it's anticipated that it shouldn't take longer than 3 years to complete a regional growth strategy. Having said that, if it goes longer, it goes longer. But that's it's not a time limit, but it's perhaps a time limit for the provincial funding. But okay. I would anticipate that over 3 years, that $250,000 would be expended in the development of the strategy.
That would be a target for the expending of those funds.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I could just have a quick follow-up. And this is the thing that slightly alarms me, that we are being set targets. Quite rightly, everybody should be set targets to get something accomplished. But if that means that we have to get something done which we can't all agree on, especially with a body as large as this, then it could be seen as being forced down, on something that we haven't had the time to considering. And the number of points that have been brought up here have been huge. The breadth is incredible. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief, just addressing some of the comments that were made. I think we all took our oath. We all know we're sitting representing the region. It's also true that in electoral areas, those people get to vote for one politician that sits at this table. And they express, I was going to say loudly, but at least directly when door knocking on doorsteps, what's important to them. And so making sure that is brought forward. So, in my short time here, I've been able to work with most directors, both municipal and electoral areas, and start to work on some pretty big things. So, having this strategy, it does feel redundant to me. I think that working on important issues is our job, and I have some things that are being worked on with areas around me, and we'll continue to do that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Director Acton and then Director Douglas.
Everybody has a lot of good points, but I think we're not quite as cohesive as we once thought we would move along with this. And I'm feeling like Director Martman a bit closer to him. First I was over here, now I'm over there, and it's feeling like we need to, a few of us are very certain, and some are just completely against, and then some are kind of like, I want to believe, but I don't have enough information to believe. So I guess, we need to show a little patience for each other, and I would look to the chair to maybe come up with a compromise of continuing to workshop this, where we've had the province come and it wasn't a great presentation, but maybe we just need to keep talking about it a little more so that we're all, going in the same direction. And I think we can do that, and we can all get to the point of where Director Stone talked about working together, but I think we need to just have some patience and find a way to make that happen.
I'm glad to see our CAO step to the lectern. Perhaps she can bail me out. Miss Miles Wilson.
Well, I thank you all. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I've taken copious notes because there's been so many things shared. But I just wanted to reflect on and Ms. Charles has already made most of these comments, but I just wanted to kind of reflect on a couple of things in that you have a united vision, you have a strategic plan that really outlines pillars for how we move forwards. And I think it's been articulated as well that the RGS can be what you want it to be. It can be custom. It can be based on the vision that you've already established in Cowichan 2050, as well as your corporate strategic plan, where you've really articulated that First Nations reconciliation and watershed stewardship and protection are your primary objectives in the region. There's other comments that have been made about how it can focus on stitching together the community plans that have already been adopted and reflect this vision, as well as the new modernized OCP, which could be enshrined in an RGS. But I just wanted to reflect on the fact that it can be very daunting to get into the granular details of it, but this is your custom tool. So I just wanted to reflect on that the vision you've already established is really what we're talking about. And the goal, as the province said when they stood up here talking about the RGS, they said that the goal is consensus. These processes are successful through the process And even if it gets to the adoption stage and it's a general rule of one vote at the bylaw stage, which Mr. Robbins has clarified, the goal is still consensus, and it is a very comprehensive process to get there. So I just wanted to reflect on those points, if that helps, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Pardon me? Question? Director?
Can you just clarify the one vote? Not
Oh,
sure
on the
that-
bylaw?
Yeah, I don't know what
Yes.
that means.
Unless there's a service and it's.
Mr. Robbins, do you have the legislation in front of you, and can you share those comments? He'll come.
Local Government Act or Community Charter?
Good morning. It's LGA, the Local Government Act. Generally speaking, when it comes to regional district voting, if there are no exceptions in the legislation and/or special rules under specific types of business that you transact, regional growth strategy, it's one director, one vote. There are no exceptions in the LGA that provides for a 2/3 on an RGS, and it is not an exception where it is weighted. Weighted is financial matters and the establishment establishment of services and/or operating those services. So this is neither a service. And so the interpretation is one director, one vote when it comes to initiation, one director, one vote if you progress to a point of adoption or advancing a bylaw. One director, one vote.
But while you're there, the implementation of a regional planning function would be it, contrary to one vote.
That would likely be a service establishment and established under the rules of establishing a service.
For the clarification, there are two different points here, yes. Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Your pleasure. I'm looking to Director Douglas.
Just a couple quick comments, and I have a suggested motion to kind of get us through this. One is, I just want to stress to everyone, we're not actually making a decision right now on whether we want to pursue a regional growth strategy. What we will be doing is giving staff direction to come back with the draft request for proposals in Q3, which is going to give us like 3 months to think about whether we want to do this, do our own research, and then if, say, I'm assuming it's going to be probably like around September. Assuming we come back in September and we decide, hey, we've reflected on this, we don't want to do it, then we can abandon this idea at that time. But you're not actually making a decision on this meeting on whether to go down this track. You're committing to staff preparing a report on an RFP and then making a decision based on that. And I just want to go back to the earlier comment really quick from Director Morrison. I take your point about all the work that's gone into the individual OCPs and to have something potentially changing what was agreed to through that process. And I would be more than happy and I'll go back to Director McGonigal, the point you've made in several meetings already is that I know I would be happy, and I think others would be as well, to see a regional growth strategy that really stitches together the OCPs that we've individually developed to date and really reinforces them without rewriting them or changing their growth boundaries. So having said all that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest a couple motions. And again, I'm hoping that by separating the regional growth strategy RFP and the regional planning service that we can deal with them separately.
Let's do one at a time, please.
So the first motion would be just option 2. Would you like me to read it out, or is?
Sure.
Okay, that it recommended the board on June 12, 2024, that staff developed a draft request for proposals for consulting services to develop a regional growth strategy for the Cowichan Valley Regional District through a partnering agreement for board consideration in Q3 2024. The CVRD communications staff prepare a news release acknowledging the receipt of provincial funding to support the development of regional growth strategy and develop content for publication on the Plan Your Cowichan site. The letter be sent to all local First Nations chiefs and councils inviting public input on the topic of regional planning and growth management, and that Action 2.1 of the CVRD Corporate Strategic Plan be revised to read, work collaboratively with member municipalities and First Nations towards the development of a regional growth strategy.
And it's been moved and seconded. Discussion, Director Segal and Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to remind our table that we're here to do work on behalf of our community. We are doing community work. Our strategic plan has a section called Our Communities, not autonomy, but community work honors the uniqueness that we all bring to this table. I just want to point out that, development without an RGS, you just look to what's happened in the South End. We have over 20,000 people in A, B, and C. That's been developed through rural sprawl. Rural sprawl is hugely detrimental to the environment, and it is not good for community because people are spread out, and the infrastructure that is built to support them is so spread out and so costly that there are not enough taxpayers to maintain them and to have an asset management plan in the long run. So now my community is dependent on grants that really is asking other taxpayers across the province to support asset management. So an RGS is going to be a strong document that puts development where infrastructure is in a sustainable way into that 20 years into the future that's been mentioned. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you. Director Morrison, please.
Clarification, on what basis does the resolution today meet the qualification to go to this afternoon's board meeting?
I will turn to Legislative Services on that matter.
No time sensitivity, we normally put these through to the next board meeting.
I don't think it's
not
imperative
same day.
personally that it goes to today's board meeting, but it's the board's discretion according to our CAO and
Well,
Mr. Robbins.
we have policy that, and it doesn't meet policy, so I would move that this be amended to the next subsequent board meeting.
Would that be okay with the mover? And the seconder. Do I have a seconder on that amendment that it be moved to the next board meeting? It is seconded, so I'll call the question on the amendment. Shall it be moved to the next board meeting? You sure can, Director Manhattan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What does this mean? This doesn't really mean anything to us, right? It could be this board meeting or next board meeting. There's no.
No, it's just a timing matter.
Yeah.
Was there someone else with a question? Director Douglas.
I guess my only comment would be that if we pass it now rather than waiting 2 weeks, we're giving staff an extra 2 weeks of lead time in terms of preparing that report regarding the draft RFP.
Ms. Miles Wilson.
Mr. Chair, just in consulting with staff, we are on break in the month of August, and so it does crunch staff's workload to push it out. I just wanted to reflect on that. It's not impossible, it just creates a challenge considering in moving it forwards, it would be delayed.
Appreciate that. Any further discussion on the amendment? Director Manhas. I'll call a question on the amendment. Shall it be moved to the next board meeting? All in favor? Opposed? The motion is defeated. Moving to the motion on the floor. Ready for the question? Director Martman?
We've been around the table and talked about pros and cons or positions on this. And I guess I come back and I look at this as being, where in our strategic plan did we have this come up now? Like the work that we have in front of us and the things we have to do are laid out through our strategic plan. And so, we're jumping ahead on this, and I'm not sure of the demand to do that. And I think that I feel like Director McClinton said the train's on the track, and I feel like there's a railroading involved with this, and I'm not sure why I have that feeling. I don't want to have that feeling. What I want to have the feeling is yes, this is something I want to engage and get on board with, and I don't want to be in the position I feel I am now. And how do I move from this position? And I think the way that I do this is having a greater understanding. And I don't want to be that person in September saying, I'm really opposed to this now, and staff has done all this work to prepare an RFP and direction from us. If they're going to get that direction, it should be solid. And I guess my thing is, I don't know the answer to this. Like, that's my problem. I don't know how to put it out to everybody to say, you know, waiting for an RFP to make the discussion is not, in my mind, is not the right time. The right time is before you give direction to staff. And so, you know, it's the, I guess it's perhaps the unknown. And in other people's minds, there's no unknown to it. It's like, it's the answer, it's a solution. And I just, you know, I don't know where the grace is to let myself or let others in the same sort of thinking to get on board, because I don't see that happening. And I don't know, you know, lots of good thoughts here, lots of good thinking, lots of great strategists in here. You know, help me out if that's in your mindset. Thank you.
Dr. Stone, you're okay? Well, I think bringing back the RFP with the terms of reference would be a good starting point for the discussion, for the concerns that you bring forward. So the terms of reference for that RFP would be brought back by staff for our discussion and input. If there's concerns within that, that would be the time to implement the changes that you require to feel more comfortable. If I may.
Go ahead, finish.
Are you okay?
No, I waved you off, but I feel
You do
I
want
just
to
need-
speak.
Yeah.
So I think that by going this route, at least we have the implementation of getting it within our strategic plan, where it is mentioned to work collaboratively with First Nations, especially that amendment to 2.1. And I would also like to add that perhaps within our strategic plan, we implement DRIPA within that as well. I think it's important that we consider that we will be expanding this table when First Nations become governing bodies, and that they should be involved in the discussion prior to the regional growth strategy. So I will turn to Director Stone.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I would echo the words. I would just ask those who are opposed to this motion to please watch this discussion again. I have heard nothing from the supporters of this that doesn't support those perspectives. And you know, too often, you know, I'm trying to be as open-minded as I can, but I can't find a valid, reasonable objection to be against a regional growth strategy with the realities of the pressures we face here. Food security, climate change, economic hardship is all and should be supported by a strong RGS that recognizes that we want smart growth and development here. People want to be here because it's one of the most beautiful places in the province, if not the world. And the only way we do that right, that reflects the values of all of us around this table and the constituencies we support from a regional lens, the best way to do that is through an RGS. Thanks.
I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Director Martman, Director McClinton, Director Morrison opposed. That motion carries. During agenda review, we allocated 30 minutes for this. And we thought that was long. And the other motion, Director Douglas,
Would you like me to move it, Mr. Chair?
if you would, please.
So the other motion is, yes, sorry, it's the first part of option one, so it would just be that it be recommended to the board on June 12, 2024, that a regional planning service feasibility study be undertaken to determine the purpose of the proposed service, the scope of the service, funding mechanisms and arrangements, service delivery, and service governance.
Can I add following discussion on the RFP for RGS?
Sure.
You're okay with that?
Sounds pretty good.
Seconding? And discussion?
So, much like the other motion, I think it's important to explore this. I've shared my reservations and those in my council. I've heard from other municipal partners. And frankly, I just have to say, and it's not to drive the wedge deeper, but this discussion highlights for me the challenges with the regional planning function. Because I listen to the arguments around this table and I see all of the supporters of this thing about regional growth, supportive of all of our colleagues' desires for their individual areas, strengthening the local area plans, making sure that we have a balanced growth and development patterns. We can, put our heads in the sand about climate change or growth pressures, but people are going to continue to want to move here, and they're going to continue to take greenfields. They're going to continue to put pressure on agricultural lands. The best way we do that is through regional growth. If we can have our come to the creator discussion, working with First Nations around how we manage regional growth, then I can definitely support a regional planning function, because that means we all get it and we're all on the same page. But if we can't find our way to that kind of a moment as a group around this table representing all of our areas, that's exactly why I'm concerned about a regional planning function. Because I watch the land use discussions here at this table and the sort of division of perspectives, and we need to start trying to find a way to come together around the diversity of perspectives that we have, that we're protecting economic interests and property rights and all of those things, but also recognizing things like biodiversity and climate change and stuff are super important. And if we can get to that place where we all recognize that we're strengthening the diversity in our communities through a regional growth strategy, then I can see us having a fruitful regional planning function. Otherwise, it's off the table, because we're all going to have to fight each other over how we move forward as a region instead of working together. But I'll support this motion because we need to explore it. Thanks.
Thank you. No further discussion. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's Director Morrison and Director McClinton opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. Would you like a break? As I would. How would you like to do this? Would you like to table this till after the board or after lunch?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm really concerned about, I'd rather keep the pressure on time and deal with these items. If they turn into protracted discussions, maybe we have to bring our lunch back to the board table, but the board agenda should be straightforward this afternoon. I'm concerned that if we push this to after board, other important engagements later in the afternoon may be missed.
No problem, but I do need a short recess. 5 minutes. We're live again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, fellow directors. Ms. Boyd, carrying on.
Thank you, Chair. R2, report from the General Manager, Land Use Services Department regarding agricultural planning.
Recommendation has been moved and seconded. Is there any questions on the report? Director Martman.
Thank you. Questions before the motion?
Motion's been made.
Motion's on the floor,
Made,
now
okay.
discussion can occur.
Okay, sorry, I thought we had questions first. Staff, thank you for this. I just trying to understand the disconnect between the resolution and the report. And the disconnect I see is that the resolution says to update the CVRD Regional Agricultural Plan. And yet the direction, or what I read in the report, is that it'll be a new plan costing $200,000. Is that enough of a question?
Chair, through you to Director Martman. So, yeah, so you would have read the report and understood that agricultural planning has been occurring at the CVRD for a number of years, but through a number of different divisions. And the previous, or the existing, now older, regional agriculture plan was first developed through the Economic Development Division. And so Economic Development, Cowichan is currently going through a strategic planning process, and it's anticipated that agriculture will likely be a focus of that process. And so a recommendation is just waiting until that process concludes before making a decision, so that potentially shapes how that plan would roll out and what division or work area would be responsible for it. There are obviously land use planning elements to regional agriculture planning, but there are also elements involving our other environmental and economic divisions. And so it's understanding who should lead the work depending on, where the need is. And a part of the reason for presenting this report today in conjunction with the earlier report was that my thought process was around looking at regional planning as a potential vehicle for delivering this type of a plan. So really at this point in time, there's no strategic action identified in the corporate strategic plan around developing this plan. So staff resources haven't been allocated to it. There's no budget currently allocated to it. And so that would need to be fleshed out.
Follow up?
Thanks. I think I've sort of got an answer, but I guess I read through the 2010 agricultural plan. And so it's a 100-page document, 80 pages with 20 pages of appendix, and quite comprehensive, and actually pretty current from my understanding of the issues. They haven't really changed other than they're more drastic today than they were 15 years ago. And so when I read the resolution, I thought, yeah, that makes sense. You're going to update that plan. But is the intent now to spend $200,000 and create a whole new one? Because it seems like a lot of the heavy lifting has been done with that previous plan and the work in it. And so I guess I'm looking and saying, would it cost $200,000? I'm trying to figure out, should we spend $200,000 on a new plan or $50,000 on updating it? I'm just trying to figure out what staff is planning, because that's the disconnect I've got. I read $200,000 for a new plan versus taking the old plan and making it updated.
Chair. So the $200,000 figure is a ballpark figure, but as you know, community engagement is not inexpensive, and we'd want to ensure that it was done properly. Certainly the number could be scaled back, then you're scaling back what you would be doing in terms of engagement. And the other question is what potential studies need to be completed outside of community engagement to prepare that plan. And I understand that there's work to be done on updating the agricultural land inventory for the CBRD. That is quite old. And so, would we need to be bringing in agrology experts or staff to, help with that process? And so, it is a ballpark number. I will give you that, but it's not going to be inexpensive, and it, needs to be thought out.
Okay, Director Stone? I'm sorry, I missed Director Nicholson was next.
Oh, go ahead.
Then I'll come to you. Sorry, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I was just a bit thrown by the recommendation being moved, because I can't quite get my head around where we're going with this in general. So from my perspective, what we need is an agricultural APC, because we're kind of moving to a local area plan driven MOCP, and agriculture is largely out of those growth areas. So and we haven't done a good job of consulting with the farming community to date on things that we've done, and it's very important. They're very engaged. And so that's the sort of the land use component from an electoral area perspective that I think needs to be taken care of. I also think we do need a regional agricultural plan, but while I agree that the last one was fairly comprehensive and so forth, I don't think it was very focused on what local governments could do and actually accomplish. And so we have the same issues magnified. So I think that that needs to be done, and it needs to be done in a really thoughtful way, and we need to spend the resources to do that. And from my perspective, it's like economic development is very important, but I think we're moving into a phase in farming where it's really going to be more about food security and adaptation to the changing environment. So to keep the farms economically viable, there's going to have to be some significant adaptation around that. So I think that planning process needs to happen, and a regional agricultural committee, to me, would be best suited to do that, to advise on that work. And I need to understand how that would fit with where North Cowichan is at, because they're obviously the other big player in the agricultural side.
Thank you. Any further questions, Director Stone?
Yeah, so thank you to Directors Martman and Nicholson, because obviously being much more intimately involved in the farming community, I think illuminates the discussion for me, particularly Director Nicholson's closing about having that committee to inform the process. And I did sort of maybe balk at the number at first. And I think it needs to be an action-oriented plan that does look at what we can do to actually facilitate successful farming and food security in the region. And I think it plays into the broader conversations we're having today about how we're going to shape the region moving forward. So I hope that by supporting this motion, that's what we would be getting out of it, is to stand up that committee to provide that interface between the farming community, the agricultural community, I guess more appropriately, and what we can do practically, an action-oriented plan to ensure food security in the region. And I think agriculture, and there's a big aquaculture place here too, right? Both on the west and east coast, we touch the coasts, whether it's seaweed or shellfish or other aquaculture opportunities, I think we need to start looking at as well. But I'm hopeful that in moving and supporting this motion, that's what we would be looking towards, is engaging with the agricultural community to make an action-oriented plan that would hopefully deliver some measurable and substantive results over the next decade to improve food security and the lot for farmers in the region.
Thank you. Anyone else while we're here? Director Martman?
Thanks. I guess maybe the direction is just as long as I have an understanding from staff that they will look at the previous plan and build from it is part of the intent, because there are, at the end of the report, there's multiple pages on not only goals, but action plans, action items from each of those goals that it has been suggested in 2010. And I would think if you look at them, they're pretty current, even from 15 years later. Maybe the order of the goals might be different, but a lot of the actions are pretty significant. And there perhaps, the relevance, as Director Nicholson says, to what actually local governments can do, but they are really, it's a pretty good starting point, I think.
Ms. Cheryl?
Mr. Chair, through you to the directors, I just wanted to add that from a land use planning perspective for electoral areas, the recommendations of the Upland Agriculture Report that was completed have been incorporated into the draft modernized official community plan. And so those aspects of that study have, looking at the land use sort of lens of policy is reflected in that incoming document. And there will also be a report on agricultural zoning at the next Electoral Area Services Committee, which focuses on how that report's recommendations around zoning will be implemented in the comprehensive zoning bylaw. So I wanted to flag that because Land Use Services doesn't have a regional service from which to develop or administer a regional agriculture service or plan or committee. It wouldn't be done through our department. It would have to be another regional service.
Okay, I see no further hands. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R3, report from the General Manager, Land Use Services Department regarding authority and strategies for affordable housing. This recommendation is for direction.
Director Stone?
Yeah, so, based on our earlier discussion, I think that this maybe is a little bit premature, this discussion. There are a number of opportunities within the region. To be fair, I can't speak to affordable housing opportunities in the electoral areas, but I know the municipalities, a number of projects are either underway or under development. And contemplating, even as it says in this report, around looking at regional planning, and this could live within that function. I think it's maybe premature to move forward on a regional affordable housing service. I think there is opportunities to access funding and working in partnership with the fund that's set up through CHA. And working with CHA through your role there as liaison and also our roles as elected officials to try and get what we need out of it in the interim with that partnership with CHA and that funding agreement. But I think that maybe with everything that's going on and the dynamics around regional planning and regional growth, that maybe this would be a follow-on discussion once we establish that process. If we do move forward with like an RGS and or a regional planning function, then perhaps the discussion of how affordable housing work lives within that function is more appropriate. So my recommendation would be to refer this or I would make the motion to refer this discussion until after the decisions are made around regional growth and regional planning.
You're making the referral motion at this time? And seconded. On the propriety of referral, any discussion? And we all know that a referral motion takes precedent. I did have a speaker's list, but it is the direction of whoever is speaking to make that recommendation.
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair. If the members wish to discuss this in more detail, then defeat the referral motion and it's back on the table.
That is the route to go, of which I was going to state. Thank you for jumping in. No, I'm just bugging you. Yeah, you did. Okay, so I'll call the question. If you wish more discussion, then defeat it. Otherwise, approve it. All in favor? Opposed? Morrison, McClinton are opposed. And Martman? So that motion is referred. Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Environmental Services Division regarding functions.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Your point of order is?
This is that was a hugely important issue. We're in a housing crisis. So I'd like to put a motion forward to reconsider that we have that conversation. There's a lot to be said about that. And, I think putting it off until whenever, when we're in the midst of a housing crisis, is not a real smart move on our part.
So you're moving that R3 be put back on the table? Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Director Martman. And in the will of democracy, I'll call the question. All in favor of reinitiating the discussion? Those opposed?
Mr. Chair, did you offer an opportunity to speak to the motion or is it non-debatable?
Non-debatable, in my view. You can challenge.
Okay, well, I'm not going to challenge your ruling. I just thought that we could
I'm
speak
just
to-
cognizant of the time and the need to either deal, and my blood sugar is low.
Okay, well, then call the question.
But if you wish, we can have discussion upon it. So I will pause the question. Is there discussion on this motion to bring back R3? Director Stone.
Well, yeah, maybe I should have said maybe refer it to the next meeting if there's a desire to go into it. Yeah, I think it is a long discussion. And based on the fruitful or less fruitful process of the earlier discussions today, I just didn't think this would be anything but a protracted discussion leading to the same conclusion. But now that we voted on the previous motion, I guess the only thing I could do is vote to reconsider it and then try and move it to our next meeting perhaps instead of further down the road. I agree it's a really important discussion, but in the context of the report and frankly my views watching discussions around housing proposals outside of the municipalities right now, I just don't have a lot of faith that this would be a fruitful discussion at this table at this time. So that's why I said let's forward it till we have some shared vision around how the growth in the areas are going to continue. And in the meantime, I know our municipal partners are working really hard to bring the housing that we need.
Appreciate that context. Anyone further? I'm going to call the question, should R3 be brought back? All in favor of bringing R3 back? Those opposed? Director Segal, Director Ishdash, Director Abbott, Director Deck, Director Nicholson, Director Douglas. And Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Toporowski. You're opposed or you want it back?
No, I was opposed.
Director Toporowski?
Opposed.
Thank you. Ms. Boyd, the vote? It failed.
Point of order.
Go ahead with the point of order.
Does a motion to refer have to have a place, a time, or a time? Does it have a time?
Until after the decisions are made on the RGS and the regional planning function. So that would be later in the fall.
That's the future, but that's not a time. I would respectfully say that's not a time.
I don't know how to put this forward, Mr. Chair, if it's a point of order to a point of order, or if that's out of order.
I think any order is in order.
But frankly, if we can't decide on a regional planning function, how the group would decide on how to move forward in a regional affordable housing context is beyond me.
Ms. Cherolf, you have some input?
Thank you, Chair. Just for the benefit of the electoral area directors, staff are working on a report, hopefully for the next electoral area service committee dealing with housing options for electoral areas. So there will be an opportunity for discussion at next week's meeting.
For a point of information, Mr. Chair, I would suggest then our electoral area directors put something creative in their motion to get the discussion back on this table sooner than the referral motion that passed earlier.
So it could come as a recommendation from EASC to bring that discussion back.
The point of order, I'm not sure it was ruled on, but I was asking that you had to have a specific time, date for a referral motion. Thank you.
Ms. Boyd?
Thank you, Chair. That the motion is actually postponed to this discussion until after the decision, regional growth and regional planning. So it's a motion to postpone for clarification. A motion to refer would be to a different committee or board, or sorry, not board, another committee or commissioner. That's a motion to refer.
May I ask the chair that if we had a motion to postpone, is that what was voted on by the members? Like, for example, and is a motion to postpone debatable? Like, sorry,
No, all fair points. I think the motion was to refer, though, if I recall Director Stone's.
Point of clarity, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If we're going to play procedural games, it wouldn't change, we're playing with semantics here. It wouldn't change the outcome of the vote or the result. So if the record would reflect a motion to postpone until after those, then that might be more appropriate. But the vote wasn't close, and I don't think it would change the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel whatever track we're on is about to derail, or already has.
The point of order that I'm asking you to rule on is that if it was a motion to postpone, is that debatable?
We did have discussion. I was lenient in I had thought it was a point of referral, so I asked for propriety on referral, but on second thought, I did allow discussion on that. And at that time, I went about the room with input from directors. If that was not sufficient, you can challenge the chair at the process, et cetera, but that was my ruling at the time. And if I had a Libra too, it would be at 9.7. Director Stone.
Motions to postpone should only be brief and confined to the propriety of the postponement. So it's debated the same way as a referral motion is.
Similar to the propriety of referral. Are we ready to move on? Because I am. Pardon me. I just need to stand up for a minute. Breathe from the diaphragm. Thank you. I've recomposed myself. Ms. Boyd.
Moving to R4, report from the Environmental Services Division regarding functions superseded by Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program.
Oh, boy. Director Stone.
I'd move the motion, the recommended resolution, if Ms. Boyd were to read it out, and then I would like to speak to it if I get a seconder.
I'll let her read it out before the seconder, but I do have a couple of hands on the second.
Thank you, Chair. Recommendation that it be recommended to the board that staff prepare bylaws to repeal bylaw number 3138, South Cowichan Water Plant Steady Service Establishment Bylaw 2008, and bylaw 3737, Shawnigan Basin Society Annual Financial Contribution Service Establishment Bylaw 2013, and 2, that consent on behalf of the electors be sought from A, at least 2/3 of the participating electoral area directors for bylaw 3138, and B, a simple majority of directors for bylaw 3737.
Director Ishdash, you seconded that motion. Director Stone, you wish to speak first, and then Director Morrison.
Thank you, and I think, in all fairness to the interest from the people who spoke in public input and over the last number of years on these, particularly the Shawnigan Basin function, and it's not to offend anyone, but the points that have been made completely are in disagreement with my view of regional governance, particularly around water issues. If anything, I've seen this board come together around water concerns better than any other issue in the region. We all recognize that both in terms of development patterns and food security and climate action, that water is the one thing that unites us. In our work with Cowichan tribes around the Watershed Board, in the province and Cowichan tribes around the Cook Isla water management and use plans, all of that shows our fundamental agreement about moving forward in a good way on water. Regional governance means coming together as a group of 9 at the electoral area directors tables, as a group of 16 at this table, and a group that will grow over time. And maybe not in the not too distant future with First Nations representation here. And to really truly support each other as a group, to be able to leverage the resources of our staff and the costs that go along with it as a group. Is how we need to move forward on issues like water. It supports not just food security, but economic security for our region, to understand our watersheds and our water and how we can balance it out, if you will. A water balancing act is a really tough thing to do in any region. But I think that we have an opportunity here in Cowichan to do that. And the way that we do that is to not put functions and funding in place that is for one area over another and somewhat given to the whim of the next electoral area director for an area. That fundamentally offends me on the principles of regional governance. And yes, we need to preserve and protect the character, but we need to do that with the strength of the body, not the one. So I'm supportive of this resolution, and I'm also supportive of all the outcomes that the individual areas want to see around protecting their water, where it's Ben's Great Underwater Lake or Shawnigan Lake or Holland Lake or Stocking Lake, all of those. I think what I've seen at this table, especially in the last number of years, is how we're trying to work together around water, whether it's about the security of our drinking water or the water that's important to all the flora, fauna, and cultural uses of the region. So this is a step forward to sort of putting our weight behind our regional functions around drinking water and watershed protection, and doing away with sort of those individual, you're on your own and your taxpayers are there to fund it in your own area type water strategies, because we need to look at this stuff regionally, if not beyond.
Thank you. Director Morrison, then Director Acton, then Director Wilson, then Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair. My remarks are more directed to staff, both finance and our corporate legislative people. I had the opportunity to pursue a funding for a function that was specific to the Cowichan Lake area in tourism following the establishment of the regional tourism function. And I don't even think it was a period of 5 years that it remained either dormant or unfunded, and was ruled at the time by the corporate officer that it wouldn't be allowed to be refunded after a period of years, given that a regional function had been created and superseded. So in regards to the remarks that we've had, I don't believe that we are permitted to have functions remain dormant and on the books when there has been a superseding regional function. So I would like to ask, if we don't need it for today, I'll support the resolution, but if we could have clarification on that, because I think there's a desire to reduce the number of functions that we have, and if there are some that are lying dormant, it would be appropriate to take them off the books as we're doing here. Thank you.
Ms. Miles Wilson.
Mr. Chair, to Director Morrison, so the province has been consulted on this, and so the recommendations have been run through the provincial staff and municipal affairs, and the logic at the direction of this body to consolidate our watershed functions in the drinking water and watershed protection program resonates with staff. And so there wasn't any messaging around that we cannot have a function that's unfunded if that's the will of the body, right? Of the will of the board to keep it so. But the logic behind consolidating, which helps us administer programs better and think more regionally, is understood and well supported by the staff that we've consulted with. The other thing too that I'll just point out is that the program, being well established, the DWWP has a partnerships policy, which then provides another layer of cooperation and collaboration, and kind of outlines how we will work together with those organizations in the community. So agreeably, it is a well-managed program, it's well set up, and it's supported that we take this approach.
Thank you for that. Director Acton, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a South Cowichan Director, I support the request for the South Cowichan Water Plan Study Service Establishment to be rescinded, but also based on the fact that in the past that function has come up in discussion a lot, but having Area D in that function was not preferred by that area, so it's become a dormant function. And I also just wanted to let the board know about the Shawnigan Basin Society function. I have been in communication with the president yesterday, and he assured me and agrees that the funding them through the DWWP is the best way to go, and to have a coordinated effort and to be able to deliver services together was his comment. So he agrees with that one.
Thank you. Moving online to Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I echo a lot of what's been said. I will support this, especially as it does include the Shawnigan Basin Society, because one of the biggest losses would be of excluding them would be their local expertise and the amount of work that they have done in the last 15, 20 years. So as on the condition that they're included actively in the DWWP, I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Martman.
Thank you. And, you know, I do get this. I do get the idea that, you know, we need to work on water regionally, climate change, housing is all regional, and I get this idea of why you want to repeal this. I do hear, though, during public input, about the concept of enabling and saying, hey, leave this so we can have some enabling to occur if and when it's needed. And that appeals to me, and maybe Director Morrison's correct, and maybe this has to get rescinded anyways, but I guess the point that I want to make is that electoral areas were kind of, I guess, again, the mantra, like, we're unique in a way, and we have our own little way of organizing, running, thinking, all those things, accountability. That's different than the municipalities in a way that I'm curious, and this is where my learning has to happen, maybe at the board, it's going to happen here today, that do municipalities have similar enabling things that they can do within their jurisdictions that allow them to work on minor things with certain nonprofit organizations to help the environment and do all those different things? I just, because this is my, this is my learning about how do electoral areas do that if that's equivalently being done by municipalities. I'm just open to learn if someone can share.
I'll turn to my L colleague from Ladysmith,
Well,
Director Stone.
we have grants and aid, just like every electoral area has a grants and aid function. They can fund initiatives with nonprofits and community groups within their communities. That's always available to them regardless of the need for the service establishment of these bylaws. And it's more broad-based. I know Area H traditionally hasn't done it. Director Marcotte didn't, but areas around the region have done that to support both community and environmental groups. And that is an opportunity available to the electoral areas, just like municipalities. We don't generally, outside of grants and aid, we could do service agreements, but typically those are for grant and aid funded functions who provide a specific social service, renewable between every 2 and 5 years, depending on the service agreement. Also offers opportunities for, like in Solterre, if a community group wants to do fireworks, to be able to come on to our municipal insurance riders, which lowers their insurances through what they would call a servicing or partnership agreement. Those, I understand, are also available through regional districts to electoral areas.
Director Douglas, you had some input there? You're good? Okay, I have Director Nicholson next.
Thank you. I'm neither here nor there on this sort of administrative type of an issue, but I would like to say that I thought that the Shawnigan folks had great foresight in establishing their Shawnigan Basin function, because I actually think in the long term, a service function by watershed makes a lot of sense, because each watershed is going to be functioning really differently and have different needs, and it really needs to be locally watershed by watershed driven. And while a regional program can begin to lay the sort of framework for doing that, I think in the long term we'll be heading towards a much more watershed specific kind of planning. And it also gives what I've watched in the community is that the community has often been out front of where the CVRD has been at with watershed issues. And so it is certainly, really great to be able to partner with the community groups that are doing that work. But as I said, I really don't have a lot of opinion about the administrative side of it. It may be nice to keep it, but maybe according to Director Morrison, it's not possible anyway, so.
Ms. Miles Wilson.
Just to the point, Mr. Chair, is that the other conversation with the provincial government around administration and management of these types of programs is that, and some regional districts have done this, is that when we develop service establishment bylaws that name an organization, that isn't necessarily focusing on the watershed. So I just wanted to make that point. In that consolidating it into the DWWP allows you the flexibility to look at it from a watershed angle and look at the many stewardship groups, including Shawnigan Basin, that you are continuing to support through that function. So it's just, some of these bylaws, we name an organization like that one in particular. And so it's a different strategy, I guess, to take a bit of a broader, more strategic approach.
Thank you. Director Stone.
Yeah, I just want to give credit where credit is due. I think Shawnigan Basin Society, along with Cowichan Watershed Board and those efforts over the last number of years, really led to the establishment and the understanding about the importance of the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service. So absolutely credit where credit is due. But from a governance and collaboration standpoint, I think a regional function is where all of these things should live. And the things that we learn from groups like Shawnigan Basin Society through partnership agreements with them and the Cowichan Watershed Board, hopefully will lead to more community groups through that knowledge sharing and through the work of our staff. So absolutely support the groups. That's not what this is about. It's about the administrative function, and I think it belongs in the DWWP program.
Thank you. Speaking of staff, is there any questions to our staff member who has been waiting patiently for 3.5 hours for his turn? I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Boyd. Sorry to keep you here.
There is no unfinished business, no new business. We move to 11 question period.
I see a hand up. Come on up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. It's Kim Bernard, Area B, Shawnigan Lake. I do have a question about the DWWP. And I'm wondering if it's fair to compare it to the CRD, where they have a robust educational outreach program. And I tried to find online what progress has been made in the last 5-6 years since this has been voted on. Where can I find this information in order to share it with the community, and particularly volunteers who would like to know how to steward this?
I think through our communications department would be the first place to reach out and see where it would reside.
Okay.
Would be my,
Like water use conservation and
Absolutely.
broader regional.
Water usage.
As it was mentioned, yeah.
that would be my, my point to where to look first.
Okay.
And they could probably point you in the appropriate direction if not.
And as a follow-up, would that also include reports as to what work has been done to date in the last 5 years to move this function forward, this regional function?
I think that would reside within the Environmental Services Department, who is standing right, or seated right behind you. If you
Okay.
reach out to those staff members, and they would give you a more appropriate answer than me.
Super, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for attending today. I hope it was as entertaining for you as it was for me. Any further questions? I thank you all for guiding me through this meeting. Ms. Boyd, please get us out of here.
There is no motion to close, so we'll move to adjournment, please.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. We'll see you at the board meeting.